This is the people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump. Indictment 71543 of 23. Appearances. By the people first, please.
For the people, ADA's Joshua Steinglass, Christopher Conroy, Susan Hoffinger, Matthew Colangelo, Becky Mangold, and Kathy Ellis.
Good morning.
Good morning. Emil Bove for Donald Trump, who is seated to my left. And I am joined with Todd Blanche, Susan Nichelles, and Kendra Wharton.
Good morning, everyone. Before we put the witness on the stand, there is one issue that I did want to clarify, and I'm addressing this to Mr. Trump. It came to my attention that there may be a misunderstanding regarding the order restricting extrajudicial statements and how it impacts upon Mr. Trump's right to testify at trial. I think it's important that I clear up any misunderstanding that might exist. I want to stress, Mr. Trump, that you have an absolute right to testify at trial, if that is what you decide to do after consultation with your attorneys. That is a constitutional right that cannot be denied or abrogated in any way. It is a fundamental right that cannot be infringed upon. Just as you have the absolute right not to testify, if that is what you decide to do after consultation with your lawyer. The order is restricting extrajudicial statements. That does not prevent you from testifying in any way. It does not prohibit you from taking the stand, and it does not limit or minimize what you can say from the witness stand. In fact, as the name of the order indicates, it only applies to extrajudicial statements, that is, statements that are made outside of court. It does not apply to statements made from the witness stand. Please let your attorneys know if you have any lingering doubts or questions that need to be clarified, and I will try to answer them for you. Anything else?
Your Honor, not with respect to this witness, but I do believe that we will have some evidentiary objections to what we believe will be the next witness, which we can handle now or after this witness, whichever.
Why don't you start?
Sure. So we understand that the next witness is a summary witness and intends to get in a number of exhibits that we have, business records, foundational objections to for all of them. But then we have other objections for 3 of them, Your Honor. So the first one, I can start with the business records exemption. So we understand that the proffered evidence include 2 truths, alleged truths by President Trump, a handful of tweets by President Trump, and a tweet by the Washington Post, and then a news article by the Washington Post. We believe there are hearsay problems with each of these exhibits without the proper business record foundation being laid. So with respect to the truths, it may be that by a preponderance of the evidence, the statement, that the truth itself could be allowed into evidence without a statement of the defendant. But there is a lot of information on every tweet, for example, the name at Real Donald Trump, the time it was sent, and other information. That's hearsay. And that hearsay we don't believe is admissible through just a summary witness who doesn't have any foundational expertise to talk about the basis for how the date is put on the tweet, how, the typical things that you would expect for any type of business records. The same thing with the truths, Your Honor, the same exact problem. There is content within the truth that purportedly they will argue are President Trump's statements. But there is a lot of stuff in that exhibit that is, 1, pure hearsay, and it is an out-of-court statement that be offered for the truth of the matter asserted, the date, the time, the handle. And without a proper foundation, we object to that coming in. The straight and the same is true of the Washington Post tweet for the same reasons. And the same is true of the Washington Post article for the same reasons. Separately, for 3 of the exhibits, putting aside the hearsay objection, we don't believe they should come into evidence. Turning first to 405A and B, 405A is the Washington Post article dated October 7, 2016, laying out the purported Access Hollywood tape. Your Honor's ruling a couple of different times, including from the motions in Lemeen, about what would be and what would not be allowed in with respect to the Access Hollywood tape. The original ruling said no tape, but witnesses could testify about it at the beginning of the trial. There is now going to be an email introduced that has a transcript of a portion of that Access Hollywood tape. What the people want to introduce now under 405A is the full, what amounts to a full transcript from the Washington Post article. And sure, there can be an instruction that says it's not offered for the truth, but there are quotation marks around the entire article. And so the danger of unfair prejudice is extreme in this situation. Remember, the only reason why the Access tape, Hollywood Access tape, is coming in at all in this trial, under the court's ruling, is to show intent and motive, and to show how the campaign responded, and why they responded the way it did. There is already a ton of evidence about the Access Hollywood tape from Mr. Pecker, from Mr. Davidson. I expect there will be a witness today that will testify extensively about the reasons why the Access Hollywood tape, even on the fringes, are allowed.
What are you asking me to do?
To exclude 405, and to exclude 405B, which is a tweet that went on at the same time, on October 7th, 2016, at 4:05 p.m., that has a photograph of President Trump and Billy Bush and one of the women that was part of the interview, and it says, "Breaking. Trump recorded having extremely lewd conversation about women in 2005. And then it says, Trump recorded having extremely lewd conversations about women in 2005 inches, actually in the photograph as well. I mean, at this point, and we are happy to address the Weinstein decision. The Weinstein decision, as it pertains to this, but what the court has already done, and what the court should do, in light of the Weinstein decision, is be very careful about the letting in this kind of evidence.
When you say the Weinstein decision, are you referring to the Court of Appeals reversal?
That just came down, Your Honor.
That's a decision that deals with Sandoval and Molyneux. I don't see it having any impact on my ruling.
Well, Your Honor is letting this in on, at least in part, on a Molyneux.
The Court of Appeals didn't lay out any new law. They simply ruled on the facts of that case. But the Molyneux ruling, the law that applies to Molyneux, the law that applies to Sandoval, it remains the same. And that's the same standard that I applied when I made my decisions.
Judge, agreed. Even under that application that you applied, it would be extremely unfair and extremely prejudicial, given the court's ruling already, to now extend it more to say that there is only going to be testimony, there is only going to be multiple witnesses.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm just saying that the Weinstein decision doesn't necessarily factor into this.
Well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to do the final exhibit or wait until later?
No, go ahead.
The final exhibit is 408B. It's an alleged truth that is dated August 4th of last year at 4:16 p.m. It says, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." This truth has been extensively discussed and briefed in the D.C. case, and the absolute reality is, and there are news articles that I'm happy to pass up to the court that make this plain this
Thank you.
This truth had nothing to do with witnesses, had nothing to do with the case. It had to do with what had been going on for a month in July and leading up to the beginning of August within the Republican Party. There was a massive movement by certain PACs and certain individuals to vocally tell everybody within the party, we're going to spend a lot of money to make sure that President Trump doesn't get reelected. And the campaign, not surprisingly, reacted forcefully in articles, in statements, and then ultimately with this truth. It had nothing to do with witnesses. And by the way, there has been oral argument in D.C. There were briefings where the prosecutors in D.C. suggested that this is one of the reasons why protective orders should be put in place, and then later a gag order. But when pressed, there has been no proof to disprove that. So when the context of it comes into evidence here, there is no basis for it. They may be able to prove up the theory they have about some of President Trump's truths and tweets, and how it may or may not affect witnesses, but not this one. This one has nothing to do with witnesses.
So I appreciate that you have given me a sense of what it is that we are looking at. I think we are going to have to devote a little bit of time for this, and we have the jurors waiting, so we will take it up later. There is just one of the issues that you raised that I would like to hear from the people on, and that is the photograph of Mr. Trump.
Sure.
People, I would like to hear from you as to why you feel that you need that.
Yes, Your Honor. With respect to 405B, I will just say that as Your Honor noted during the April 15th offer of proof, that's transcript page 34 through 35, Your Honor's ruling was that we could not play the Access Hollywood tape itself, not that other references to the tape can't be brought in. And Your Honor ruled that a full transcript of the tape was, in fact, admissible under appropriate circumstances. This would just be a screenshot of the publication of the underlying article via Twitter. Secondly, Your Honor, in any event, we are not introducing this exhibit or 405A for their truth, but merely for the date and time at which the article was published. If the defense is going to stipulate to the date and time, we will withdraw these.
I agree with everything that you said as far as my rulings, and you can introduce a transcript. I don't have a problem with that. I don't see the need for this. This goes to the reason why I kept the tape out in the first place. I don't want those words to be associated with Mr. Trump's face or his voice. It's just very powerful evidence. It's damning evidence. And I don't think it's necessary. You are going to get to read the transcript. You are going to introduce testimony about it. This is not necessary.
Your Honor, would you be amenable to us introducing it if we block out the picture and just introduce the date and time that the article is published?
And what is the purpose?
Just to establish the original date and time that the Access Hollywood tape story was published.
Mr. Blanche rises.
1 second, Mr. Blanche. Is there no other way to establish the date and time of this tape?
The other way would be through Exhibit 405.
Your Honor.
Which is what? I don't know it offhand.
Which is, this is the original version of the article, which was published or retrieved from a website called The Wayback Machine, which finds previous versions of websites and shows the original date of publication.
All right. So the people do have a right to establish the date that it was printed. You may want to stipulate to that. I don't know if you want to stipulate to that, but if you don't, I do have to give them the opportunity to establish that.
May I propose something second, potentially? If they show the witness, just the witness, either the article or the tweet, and say, was the article published on this date, at this time? Does that refresh your recollection? We're not objecting. And the witness can say yes. I mean, that's all they're offering it for, apparently. Anyway, that's the way that you can get it in.
I will have it to the people, if that's satisfactory. They may want to have something more physical, something more persuasive than just the witness having their memory refreshed.
It's also in the email, Your Honor.
And more than just having their memory refreshed. You can sort it out. I think the people can establish and should establish the date of the tape, and they should be given the opportunity to do that. I don't want this picture to come in, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Let's get the witness, please.
Judge, can we approach briefly on an issue related to the witness on the stand?
Sure.
At sidebar.
I just wanted to raise, so they handed us exhibits yesterday, including what they have marked as G1 and G2, which are internal emails from the district attorney's office that relate to Jeremy Rosenberg. They are basically HR emails about the issues surrounding Jeremy Rosenberg. This witness has never seen these documents. He would have no knowledge of them. You know, he may have met Jeremy Rosenberg at some point. He doesn't know Jeremy Rosenberg, so I just want to be very careful. I mean, my view is they shouldn't be in any way read into the record or anything. I guess if they wanted to show them to the witness and ask him if he has ever seen them, maybe they can do that.
So we seek to ask the witness the questions to impeach the chain of custody on the two devices that he has testified about. And so what I would like, and Mr. Rosenberg is the person who turned the phones over to HTAU for both phones. There was a delay in the period of time between when he picked the phones up and when he dropped them off. For one of the phones, it was about 4 days. For another one, it was overnight. That was part of the reason that Mr. Rosenberg is the...
I understand why you want to impeach him. I don't have a problem with you wanting to impeach Mr. Rosenberg, but I don't think that this is the right way to do it. You can ask the witness, who did you get the phone from? Who retrieved the phone? Who gave it to you? If you would like that on the record that it was Mr. Rosenberg, and you ask him specific questions about the timing of all that, but you can't show him HR documents.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's all right.
I don't plan to show him the documents or to try and refresh him in any way. I would ask permission to put questions to him along the lines, are you aware that Mr. Rosenberg was disciplined on this basis?
I don't think that's appropriate.
If I could hand up.
Sure.
This is the Court of Appeals in People v. Baez, and I'm focused on the language of beginning with subsection 2 that talks about the defense's ability to impeach on the basis of the gaps, just like this. So just the fact that these things were violated, they violated the district attorney's office policy to such an extent that there was discipline on this basis.
But you can call the witness, can't you? You can call a witness if you want. You don't have to use someone who is a technical person to help you establish bias or prejudice or anything like that with this witness. You can ask him, where did you get it? Who gave it to you? How long did it take? All of that is relevant to his testimony, but I'm not going to allow it.
Just so I understand, then we will be permitted to call two different witnesses from the government to establish the facts that led to the gaps in the chain of custody? Because these things...
Is that what I just said?
Well, that's why I'm asking, Judge, because these things go to the reliability.
You can try to call any witness that you want, and we will have to decide if it's relevant, if there is a basis relevant to the case or not.
These things go to the reliability of the evidence.
Mr. Bove, I'm not going to allow it.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you.
Sidebar concluded.
Okay, let's get the witness, please.
Witness entering. Watch your step. Remain, raise your right hand, and face the court clerk.
You were already sworn in, right?
Yes.
All right, you can have a seat. All right, I'm sorry. I remind you that you are still under Let's Get the Jury, please. All rise. Jury entering. Jury enters. Please be seated.
Do both sides stipulate that the jury is present and properly seated?
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, jurors. Welcome back. I apologize for keeping you waiting. I know that you got here a little bit early today, and I know that you were waiting for a little thank you, but we are ready now. Mr. Bove.
Thank you, Judge. May I inquire?
Please.
Good morning, Mr. Dowse.
Good morning.
Yesterday we were talking about two cell you analyzed, right?
Yes, sir.
And I think we were referring to them as CP1 for cell phone 1 and CP2 for cell phone 2.
Yes.
And both phones were delivered to HTAU in that intake process on January 23rd of 2023, correct?
Yes, they were.
And searches of those phones were authorized pursuant to a consent form signed by Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And both of the devices, CP1 and CP2, were delivered to HTAU by Jeremy Rosenberg, is that right?
Yes.
And let's focus on CP1, which is the phone with the gold backing, right?
That's correct.
Do you recall that Mr. Conroy showed you the consent form that Michael Cohen signed, which is relating to that phone yesterday?
Yes.
And do you recall that Cohen signed that form on January 19th of 2023?
Yes.
That's the form relating to CP1?
Correct.
And do you recall that he signed the form about 9:05 that morning on January 19th?
I believe so.
And it's your understanding, is it not, that at the time that he signed the form, he turned CP1 over to Mr. Rosenberg, correct?
Yes.
And so there is a gap there between the 19th, when Mr. Rosenberg took possession of the phone, and the 23rd, when it was delivered to HTAU, right?
That's correct.
And we talked yesterday about the chain of custody. Do you remember that?
I do.
And so, as far as you know, for this piece of the chain, it's on Mr. Rosenberg for that period of about 4 days, right?
Correct.
And that, from a forensic perspective, I think what you said is your ideal situation would be when the phone is acquired, it's immediately delivered to HTAU so it can be in a secure environment, right?
Ideally.
And there is a gap, isn't there, in your understanding of what happened to the phone during that period?
There is.
And it's not ideal from a forensic perspective to have a gap like that because you don't know what happened to the data?
Correct.
Getting back to that form, Mr. Rosenberg signed that form, right?
Yes.
And there was a second place on the form for a second witness, right?
Yes, there was.
With no signature, correct?
I can't recall.
If we take, this is just Mr. Bernick, the court, the parties, and the witness, if we could just take a look at Defense Exhibit G15, and if you could take a look at that, the question is, does that refresh your recollection about second witness spot in the form and the fact that it's blank?
That's correct.
And so, can we take that down? Thanks, so there wasn't a second witness on the form, right?
There wasn't.
And that is not standard from a forensics perspective either, correct?
Sometimes.
Meaning sometimes only one member of the district attorney's office collects the phone, is that right?
Yes.
And in that situation, like the one we have here with CP1, there is only one witness who knows what happened during that collection process, right?
Yes.
Well, there is one witness from the district attorney's office,
One signature.
Mr. Rosenberg, and then there is another witness, Michael Cohen, right?
That's correct.
And the reason that is not an ideal way to handle it in this fashion is that if there is a dispute about what happened during the acquisition, it's sort of what Mr. Rosenberg said versus what Mr. Cohen said, right?
Theoretically.
And so the reason that there is a second witness space on that form is that in an ideal situation, from a forensic perspective, you would have two witnesses in a position to say, this is what happened when I picked up the phone.
Ideally.
And we don't have that here.
We don't have that.
And so during that period, the January 19th through the 23rd, you don't know if the phone was powered on or off, right?
I do not.
You don't know if it was in a Faraday bag, correct?
I do not.
You don't know if it was hooked up with the internet or not, right?
I do not.
Now, we talked yesterday about a manual review process for phones, taking pictures of what the contents of the phone are, right?
Sometimes, yes.
And I asked you, Do you recall whether somebody at HTAU did a manual review of CP1? Do you remember that?
I don't recall anybody at HTAU doing a manual review.
And I would like to show you, just Mr. Bernick, this is for the court, the parties, and the witness, Defense Exhibit G17, please. And I want to see if that refreshes your recollection about a manual review process.
Okay. So after we had taken an image, right, these are snapshots that we take of the device after we do the extraction. We then load it into the same software, and we use the software to take screenshots.
And so these on Defense G17 are images of the face of the phone in different states at the time you got it on or around January 23rd. Is that your understanding?
That would be correct, yes.
And so you testified yesterday that you found a Signal app on this phone, right?
There was.
And you said that the Signal app allows users to conduct encrypted communication, correct?
Yes.
And to send something encrypted is communications, which allows users to send communications to explode or self-delete?
On some of them, you can do that, yes.
It's a user option, correct?
It is.
And when that happens, when Signal is set up in that fashion, it becomes, and the messages are deleted by the app. It is very difficult for a forensic technician like yourself to recover the messages, right?
It is very difficult.
And Telegram, which you said was on CP1, correct?
Yes.
It has a similar function, right?
It can, if set by the user.
It's a user option to set messages to delete or disappear from the phone, right?
You can.
And do you recall that Mr. Cohen had a, quote, self-destruct timer set up in the Telegram app?
I do not recall.
Mr. Bernick, this is for the parties, the court, and the witness, please. If you could take a look at Defense Exhibit G4, and there is an entry where the numbers are in green. Do you see that?
I do.
And does that refresh your recollection about the self-destruct timer that Mr. Cohen set up?
Yes, there appears to be a self-destruct timer on that particular conversation.
And at least for that conversation, it was set up to self-destruct in 7 seconds. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Do you recall that there was also an app installed on CP1 called Dust?
Dust, I do not recall.
Mr. Bernick, if you could please bring up for the witness, the parties, and the court, Defense Exhibit G3. Does that refresh your recollection about the Dust app?
Those are the apps that were running in the background. Correct. It looks like it had not logged in. It was prepared to be set up. Maybe it was installed, but it just was not set up.
Or it's possibly, like you said, right, in the beginning of the answer, that he had logged out and just needed to log back in, right?
That's correct.
And were you familiar with the Dust app at the time of this review?
Not at the time of the review.
Are you now familiar with it?
I am now.
And you are aware, are you not, that this is another app with a function that allows a user setting to delete the messages very quickly after they are set, right?
You can.
You can set that up that the message self-deletes when it's read by the other party, right?
That's correct.
And in that instance, it would be virtually possible for someone in your position to recover data on the phone relating to those messages, correct?
That's correct.
Now, I want to talk about the data you extracted from CP1, okay?
Yes.
You testified yesterday that you did not obtain copies of the data that the FBI had seized from this same device, right?
I had not.
And we talked about hash values yesterday, correct?
That's correct.
And so, in the absence of having that other copy, you couldn't compare the hashes to see if the data had been manipulated, correct?
That's correct.
You could not compare the two different data sets to determine if the data had degraded between 2018 and 2023, correct?
I cannot.
Do you know what a factory reset is?
I do.
What, for a cell phone, what is a factory reset?
A factory reset is when you, let's say, got a new phone, you want to retire this particular phone, you can go in and set, many of you perhaps have iPhones, you can actually go in and do a reset, so it resets the phone back to the factory settings.
And the factory reset setting can also be used to essentially delete user data from a phone, correct?
That is correct.
And it sometimes is called wiping the phones, right?
Same thing as a wipe.
And by wipe, you mean wipe all of the data off the phone, correct?
It does.
And yesterday you testified about an audio file that you said had a date associated HIT September 6th, 2016. Do you remember that?
I do.
And you know the file that I'm talking about?
I do.
Do you recall that there was a factory reset of CP1 on October 15th, 2016?
Yes, there was.
So subsequent to the date associated with that file, there was a wipe of CP1, correct?
Yes, there was.
By the user of the phone, right?
Correct.
And as far as you know, that's Michael Cohen, right?
Could have been.
Well, he was the user of the phone, right?
He was the user.
And he provided the password to the phone, right?
Yes.
You don't have any information that somebody else wiped CP1, right? Do you?
I do not.
Just yes or no that sequencing the date associated with that audio file relative to the wiping of the phone raises some questions about that file, right?
You have to then look at where that file came from.
Right. It raises some questions that require further analysis. Fair?
That's correct.
Do you recall that there was some kind of backup loaded onto CP1 in January of 2017?
I do.
And that was on January 25th, 2017, correct?
That's correct.
And on the same day, January 25th, 2017, there was a sync performed on the phone, right?
That's correct.
And a sync is a situation where a user can connect a phone to a laptop, right?
That's correct.
And move data from the laptop onto the device, correct?
Yes.
And in this instance, with CP1, in the sync that happened in January of 2017, the phone was connected to a laptop with a user named Michael.Cohen, right?
Yes.
And so more than 4 months after the date that you have associated with this audio file, there was some kind of sync where Mr. Cohen plugged the phone into his laptop and loaded some files from the laptop, right?
Right. When you plug it into iTunes, it does a full backup of whatever that backup is that you are restoring from iTunes and restores everything back to that phone. So that file got restored at that time.
That's one way just to do a sync, right? But there are many ways that that transfer process could have occurred, correct?
From what I know, it is generally a complete iTunes backup. Normally, people don't select things. They select the entire thing.
But you don't know what happened here?
An entire backup happened.
Right. And you don't know what the backup entailed, correct?
Meaning?
Meaning you don't know what was transferred onto the phone in January 2017?
That file, certainly.
We are going to come back to the metadata associated with the September 6th file.
Uh-huh.
But I want to talk about the laptop a little bit. You didn't collect Michael Cohen laptop, right?
I did not.
And you know that Michael Cohen is cooperating with the district attorney's office, correct?
Sure, he's consenting to the phones. He's cooperating.
He's going to testify at this trial on behalf of the government, right?
Yes.
And so you know that there was the possibility to ask Mr. Cohen for the laptop, right?
There certainly could be.
Certainly, if you had the laptop, you could know with a lot of precision all of the things that Mr. Cohen loaded onto the phone in January of 2017, right?
I could.
But that did not happen here, correct?
No, it did not.
And so you testified yesterday that there were 39,745 contacts saved on CP1, right?
I did.
And I think you said that was unusual, correct?
It is.
But isn't it a fact that that is entirely consistent with Michael Cohen dumping a bunch of data from his laptop onto this phone?
It's the contacts that are assigned in his iCloud account that over the years have accumulated to that many contents.
Yes, over the years on the laptop, right?
In whatever the account that he used to log in, yes.
And we can only guess because neither of us have seen the laptop, right?
That's correct.
But when you have testified that the number of contacts was unusual, one potential explanation for the unusual nature of the number of contacts is this laptop syncing, correct?
It could be.
So let's talk some more about this audio file, all right? Think you had acknowledged yesterday that the file cuts off mid-conversation, correct?
Towards the end of it.
Well, how do you know if it's towards the end of the conversation?
Because when you listen to the whole thing in the last 46 seconds and then it cuts off.
Right. So you just mean the conversation cuts off at the end of the audio file, just to clarify?
That's correct.
You don't know how long the conversation continued, correct?
No, I don't.
You are aware that a transcript of that audio file was released to the public by Michael Cohen's lawyers in 2018, right?
I had heard.
Do you recall a news coverage relating to that release?
I don't.
I'm sorry?
I don't.
Mr. Bernick, for the court, the witness, and the parties, if we could please bring up Defense G19. I will ask you to take a look at that. And I will ask you, does this refresh your recollection as to, in July 2018, Michael Cohen and his attorneys released what purported to be a transcript of the recording that you testified about?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yeah, I don't certainly remember that article coming out, but that appears to be the article about such event.
It looks like it happened, right?
It does.
Objection.
Sustained.
So this indicates that Cohen and his attorneys in 2018 were handling this file external to the phone, correct?
Objection.
Overruled.
External to the phone?
Meaning they sent it to the media in the summer of 2018, right?
Could have, yes.
And the file was out there, correct?
And the file was out there.
And it looks like it was being, when I say it's external to the phone, what I mean is it was sent out to the public, and there was a process by which it was removed from the phone to get it out there.
It was copied off of it, apparently.
You testified yesterday that you heard that there was an incoming phone call on a device around the time of this recording?
Yes.
And I just want to clarify, there is no exhibit that you offered that you didn't offer anything. There is no exhibit that you testified about that reflects an artifact from CPL relating to this phone call that you've heard about.
Repeat that question, I'm sorry.
None of the exhibits that you offered reflect data from the phone itself as relating to such a phone call, correct?
No.
And so your forensic analysis of the device did not reveal any such call, right?
That's correct.
And when I say any such call, I mean a call that could be interpreted to interfere with the recording that you've testified about?
That's correct.
And so, because that's the case, you were not in a position to do any forensic analysis about the interplay between the Voice Notes app and any purported phone call on September 6th, 2016, because the data just wasn't there, right?
That's right.
Mr. Bernick, can we please bring up Government 247, which is in evidence? This is the metadata associated with this September 6th recording, right?
Yes, it is.
And this is metadata that you extracted from the physical device CP1, right?
Yes, it is.
And this exhibit does not indicate when the audio file was last modified, right?
Last modified, the timestamp that it appears is the name of the file. So when the voice recording memo records the file, an audio file, it actually embeds the timestamp that the recording was made. In this case, it would have been 2016, so September 6th at approximately 10:56. So wherever that file existed on an iPhone associated with that account got restored, as mentioned before, back onto this device. One of the columns you look at is that source file information. When that comes over from the backup, you will see the same date and time if that recording was modified or edited at some point later, and adding something or deleting something, you would then have timestamps that reflect that time it was edited. But in this case, this particular file shows the same metadata information about the time.
Judge, I move to strike all of that as non-responsive.
Overruled.
You just testified about your theories of the timestamp on the screen, right?
I did.
That is your hypothesis, correct?
It's my experience, yes.
And look, you have a ton of experience with forensic science, right?
Yes.
And so you are testifying as a scientist who is trying to draw some inferences from what you see on the screen, right?
Correct.
This report, my question was, does this report reflect a date modified at all?
No, just the timestamp when it was created.
Now, I would like to look at another metadata report that's in evidence. So, Mr. Bernick, if we could bring up Government Exhibit 253 in the top pane and 252 at the bottom. And so this is the photograph that you testified about yesterday, right?
It was.
And you said that's Michael Cohen at the top?
Yes.
And in the bottom, Government's 252, that is a report, the metadata associated with that file, right?
Yes, it is.
And if we could zoom in on the sixth column beginning modified date, please. Do you see those columns?
I do.
And so that is information with respect to that image about the date it was modified, created, and accessed, right?
That's correct.
And so those are fields that were generated for this image when you ran the report for the metadata associated with the image, correct?
That's correct.
And when you ran the report associated with the metadata linked to the audio file, it did not generate those fields, correct?
It did not.
Do you recall that there was also a properties list file associated with this audio file saved on the phone?
There is a property list that contains information, yes.
And there was a file associated with the audio file entitled Manifest P List or Property List?
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
And that's a particular type of file that relates to a phone sync, right?
Yes.
And it can provide some information about the timing of this sync process that we talked about between a laptop and a phone like CP1, correct?
That's correct.
And so we've talked about it, a sync that we know occurred between CP1 and Michael Cohen's computer on January of 2017, right?
That's correct.
Do you recall that there is a separate property list file that reflects a date of October 17th, 2020?
I do not.
Mr. Bernick, this is for the court, the witness, and the parties, please. If you can take a look at Government Exhibit G11. And so, just so we can get oriented here, you are probably more familiar with this than I am. This is a file list in the left pane, and you can see highlighted is the audio files itself, right?
Yes,
And so this is metadata associated with the audio file, correct?
it is.
And so in the right pane, you see a last access time of January 25th, 2017, correct?
That's correct.
So let's take a look at page 2, please. And now, in that left pane, do you see there is a folder with the name of the audio file?
That's correct.
And in that folder is a file called manifest plist, right?
There is.
Plist means property list, correct?
Yes,
And you said a minute ago that that contained information about the timing of a sync, right?
it can. Yes.
And so if you see that on the right, in the right pane, there is a window with file information associated with the manifest plist file.
I do.
Can I pause briefly to apologize to the court reporter? Do you see the date associated with that?
I do.
And the dates are October 17th, 2020, right?
That's correct.
And so this reflects another sync between a laptop and this phone, CPL, right?
Yes.
And you have presented no information in the exhibits that have come in through the government about that sync, right?
I have not.
And you testified that the first sync in 2017 was from a laptop associated with Michael Cohen, right?
That's correct.
A laptop you don't have, right?
Yes.
A laptop you have not been able to examine, right?
No.
And now we are talking about a sync in 2020 on this phone. We don't know what it was from, correct?
I do not.
You could only guess?
Based on this file, I do not.
And we would have to take Michael Cohen's word for whatever happened in October of 2020 with respect to this phone, right?
It seems so.
Do you recall if this phone was actually powered on in September of 2020?
September of 2020, it could have been. I do not know.
And I want to refresh your recollection about that. But first, let's talk about the significance of the fact that you are performing forensic analysis of a phone in January of 2023 relating to files in 2016, right?
That's correct.
And there are these intervening events that we're talking about, correct?
That's correct.
And they present questions about the reliability of the evidence, correct?
It would seem so.
And that is these, as a practitioner in your science, these are questions to be addressed, right?
Certainly.
So let's take a look. Mr. Bernick, this is for the court, the party, and the witness, please, as Defense Exhibit G12. And do you recognize this as being from the timeline review of the Celebrite report relating to CPL?
Yes.
And there is a highlighted row here. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Would it tell me if you need me to zoom in on anything?
I can see.
Okay. This shows that the phone was not only turned on, but actually used in 2020, right?
Yes, it does.
September 30th, 2020. Correct?
That's correct.
And if you look at the source file information that's calling for the highlighted cell, there is a file. I can't really see it.
Shine 2, M4A.
Thank you. That's an audio file, right?
It is.
That's an extension associated with an audio file?
Yes, it is.
And so, in September of 2020, this is well after 2016, well after the FBI searches in 2018, and long before you were given the phone, this phone was on, being used to do something with the recording, correct?
It was.
And we don't know what, right?
I do not.
And we would have to take Michael Cohen's word for correct?
It would seem so.
Do you recall that this phone was turned on again in 2022?
I do not.
Mr. Bernick, this is for the court, the parties, and the witness. And if we could take a look at Defense G13, and I will ask you to take a look at that. And the question is, does this refresh your recollection that the device was turned on again on March 28th, 2022?
Yes, it was.
And this is a situation, is it not, where the device was used to make a recording, right?
Yes, it was.
And if you look at the recording pane on the far right side, that says there is a recording that was created that was 40 minutes and 50 seconds, right?
That is correct.
So this phone was turned on in 2022 again, right?
That's correct.
Used by Michael Cohen, correct?
Yes, it was.
To make a recording, correct?
To make a recording.
And you don't know what he was doing, do you?
I do not.
And this is far from ideal from a forensic perspective. If you are trying to determine in a reliable fashion what went on with this phone in 2016, correct?
If something happened in 2016 on the device, that file is going to be saved on that device.
Right. And this phone has been synced multiple times, turned on and off since that time. All sorts of things have happened that create variables that in your ideal situation would be investigated, correct?
Certainly.
Including this laptop that Michael Cohen had. What's on it? What got loaded onto the phone, right? Those are questions from your perspective.
Objection.
Sustained.
The things that I've shown you this morning raise some questions about how this phone was handled, right?
Yes.
And this phone was not handled through no fault of your own. You took possession of this phone in January 2023, right?
That's correct. 2023.
And you have extensive training and best practices for how to handle electronic evidence like this, correct?
I do.
And in your ideal situation, if you were asked to analyze data from 2015 and 2016, the things that happened subsequent to this phone, the FBI search, the syncing multiple times, the factory reset, the phone being powered on and off by the user, subsequent to all of these things, those all present real challenges to understanding this data, right?
It would have to be taken into account.
And in many ways, we are just going to have to take Michael Cohen's word for it, aren't we?
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Yes, thank you, Judge. Good morning, Mr. Dowse.
Good morning.
Good to see you again. You were just asked a series of questions about if you knew what Michael Cohen was doing at various points over the last 5 years. Take it you are not a friend of Michael Cohen's?
I'm not.
So you don't hang around with him to track what he's doing on a daily basis?
I do not.
You were also asked a series of questions about a phone being turned on and turned off and used. Is it unusual for a phone to be used?
No.
Is it unusual for a phone to be used to make recordings?
No.
Now, you were asked a series of questions just towards the end of Mr. Bove's cross-examination about other recordings that were made on this phone. Is that right?
Yes.
But those are noted, the recordings that are at issue here in this case. Is that right?
That's correct.
Want to talk for a minute? You were asked some questions about the end of the phone call between the defendant and Michael Cohen that we played the other day, and sort of how it ended and how it sort of cut off at the end?
Yes.
We also put into evidence some call logs from the phone?
Correct.
From a WhatsApp application, is that right?
That's right.
You wanted to see if a call came into a particular phone number at a particular time, a long time ago? What would be the best thing to look at to see if that happened?
A call detail record from the carrier.
So that's not something that resides on the phone itself, is that right?
That's correct.
You were talking about the phone records from Verizon or AT&T?
Yes.
That would be the best place to look to see if a phone call came into a particular phone number at a particular time that may have interrupted a recording?
That's the best source.
Now, you were asked over the last couple of hours, yesterday and today, a number of questions about things like Faraday bags and special rooms and the care that has to be taken. And it's all true. It's very important to be careful when we are collecting evidence, correct?
It is.
Is there a difference when evidence is collected pursuant to a search warrant and when it's collected pursuant to a consent form?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Well, a consent form is just simply a user is offering their phones. They provide the code and we can perform the full extraction of that device.
And what about when there is a search warrant?
In a search warrant, you may not have the code. It may be a hostile environment. You have to, depending on exigent circumstances, do things to a device with that search warrant that you may not from a consent form, different things.
And with a search warrant, the phone is often taken not with the consent form of the owner if the phone is taken pursuant to a court order. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I want to go back to, again, the recording that we played at the end of the day yesterday that had the defendant speaking to Mr. Cohen, the evidence in this case that's in as People's 246. The examination that you did, first of all, you were working on a full forensic extraction of the device, right?
That's correct.
And is that the gold standard as far as you are concerned about what you can look at?
Yes, it is.
And you looked at the metadata for that file. You looked at various artifacts that were in that full forensic extraction.
Yes, I did.
Did you see any evidence of tampering or manipulation on any of the data that you pulled related to the recording that's in evidence as People's 246?
I object and ask to be heard at sidebar.
Sure, please.
At sidebar.
If I could just hear the question because I got a little distracted.
I'm sorry.
Can you read back the last question?
Did you see any evidence of tampering or manipulation on any of the data that you pulled related to the recording that's in evidence as People's 246?
Thank you. Okay.
The objection, Judge, is that we are getting to a point where an expert opinion is being elicited from this witness. We are allowed to cross-examine and impeach the reliability of the evidence through this witness. That witness. He's not an expert. He can't offer an opinion like that.
He's, I think, talking about the facts of what he saw and what he did in his examination. And this is responsive to the cross-examination, and he can talk about his training and experience, which is extensive.
You did a very effective job of cross-examining this witness. I think the people have the right to try and rehabilitate the witness and bring out some facts. If I recall correctly, during your cross-examination at one point, you even referred to him as an expert. The objection is overruled.
Sidebar concluded.
The objection is overruled.
Could we have that last question read back when you are ready?
Did you see any evidence of tampering or manipulation on any of the data that you pulled related to the recording that's in evidence as People's 246?
I did not.
Did you see any evidence of tampering or manipulation with respect to any of the data on the phone related to any of the exhibits that were put into evidence yesterday?
I did not.
Just one moment, please.
ADAs confer.
Thank you very much, Judge. I have nothing further.
Mr. Bove.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dowse, let me just ask you, you were just asked questions about whether you observed evidence of tampering on CP1, right?
That's correct.
But my questions were more about variables that are unanswered in connection with the data on that phone, right?
Yes.
Unknowns, correct?
Unknowns.
So I am asking not about whether you saw affirmative tampering. My question is, did you see gaps in the handling of this data that created risks for such tampering?
Yes.
This recording that we talked about a lot this morning, September 6th of 2016, we can agree, can't we, that it cuts off mid-conversation, right?
Towards the end.
The file towards the end has a disconnect between the conversation that is ongoing and the audio file stops?
That is correct.
You don't know what happened in the conversation after that?
I don't know. There is no file.
And someone has told you about a phone call that allegedly caused the recorder to cut off, right?
Yes.
And that's your working understanding and part of the basis for your testimony, right?
That's correct.
And you were asked a question by Mr. Conroy, what's the best source of evidence to figure out if that phone call happened, right?
Correct.
And you said tools, you go to the phone company and you get the tools, right?
The call detail records.
But there is no record of that call on the device itself?
That's correct.
So that is another variable, isn't it?
It is.
And the variable, the thing that the tools does not address, is why there is a call at some phone company that's not reflected in the data itself that you looked at, right?
That's correct.
That is an open question, right?
Yes.
And we don't know?
We don't.
And because we don't know, you were not able to look at the way that the Voice Notes app interacted with the incoming call function, right?
Correct.
We don't know?
Correct. We don't know.
Nothing further.
Very briefly. Mr. Dowse, would you, if I made a phone call 7 years ago from the phone in my pocket, would you expect to see a log of that call on my phone, assuming that I used my phone?
I would not.
You would not.
No.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you, sir. You can step down.
Witness is excused.
Counsel, please approach.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
I just want to address something you raised earlier. Do we need to resolve those now, before the next witness?
Yes. I haven't talked to my co-counsel or these guys about what a stipulation would look like, potentially, with the business records objection. Overall, it still exists. We are still in the fundamental issue. I believe that just the paralegal from the DA's office is going to try to admit tweets that have dates and other information on them.
We are not seeking to admit those as business records. There will be an adequate foundation laid for those and that they are part of the...
Then the objection only remains for the last one saying, the tweet, the truth that was sent in August that says, if you come after me, I am coming after you, that objection.
And the grounds for that objection were?
As we stated earlier, there is extensive. It absolutely has nothing to do with the witness.
I think we can proceed.
We are planning to admit that with the next witness. To the extent Your Honor would like to hear argument.
So over objection.
Just to be clear about a hearsay objection, we continue to have a hearsay objection. At this point, there is no information on the tweet, on the truth. No foundation has been laid as to this witness's experience, the date, how the date ends up on the truths. That's an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth.
We plan to lay a sufficient foundation that the witness has sufficient familiarity with the social media platforms and is able to identify things based on handling the data. And as to the remaining objection that Mr. Blanche noted to Exhibit 408B, as in boy, as to that one, We believe Your Honor has already ruled that evidence of pressure on witnesses is admissible.
Judge, it's like saying an email comes in because we all get emails.
Let's go ahead and get started and see how far we get. Okay.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
The people, the next witness, please.
The people called Georgia Longstreet.
Remain standing. Face the clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
In a loud, clear voice, state your full name and the spelling of your last name.
Georgia Longstreet, Longstreet.
Your county of residence.
Kings County.
Good morning.
May I inquire?
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Longstreet.
Good morning.
Can you tell everyone where you work?
I work for the New York County District Attorney's Office.
What is your position at the New York County District Attorney's Office?
I am a paralegal.
And what are some of your duties and responsibilities as a paralegal at the New York County District Attorney's Office?
As a paralegal, our main responsibilities are to assist the attorneys in whatever cases or investigations we are working on, whether that be administrative tasks or analytical tasks.
Do some of those duties and responsibilities include locating publicly available records relevant to the case?
Yep.
In your capacity as a paralegal for the Manhattan DA's office, were you ever assigned to work on a matter involving Donald Trump?
Yes.
How long have you worked on that matter?
About 1.5 years.
As part of your role in the matter involving Donald Trump, were you ever responsible for identifying publicly available materials relevant to the case?
Yes.
Did that include responsibility for reviewing and saving publicly available social media posts that could be relevant to the case?
Yes.
Did that also include responsibility for reviewing and saving publicly available news articles that could be relevant to the case?
Yes.
So looking now specifically at social media posts, what social media platforms have you reviewed for public information related to the case?
That would be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Truth Social.
And approximately, how many social media accounts have you analyzed in connection with the case?
Probably between like 25 and 30.
Do you analyze some of those with more regularity than others?
Yes, absolutely.
How frequently do you review public data to locate relevant social media posts?
Every day. Usually multiple times a day.
That's for the 1.5 years that you have been on the case?
It is.
In total, how many social media posts have you reviewed in connection with this case?
Say anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000.
In total, how many social media posts have you saved in connection with the case?
Around 1,500, give or take.
Do you save social media posts in a particular way?
I do.
Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Sure. So I use a tool that we have called Snagit, which is basically just a way to screenshot something on the computer, take a screenshot of whatever the post is, and then I save that file to a folder, usually with the date and a few words about what the post is about, and then I hash it.
Can you explain what hashing is for the jury?
Sure. Hashing is a process used to preserve the integrity of a file by creating what is called a hash value, which is essentially a digital footprint.
What is a hash value?
So, a hash value is a unique string of characters that captures both the date and time that the file was saved, as well as the location on the computer where the file is saved.
You did that for all the social media posts you saved?
I did.
Are you familiar with a social media platform called Twitter?
I am.
Do you know whether that company changed its name at some point?
It did.
What did it change its name to?
X.
But is it still functionally the same platform?
Yes.
What was the platform called in 2016?
Twitter.
Can you briefly describe how Twitter works?
Yes. So users can put out a post or a tweet, and that can consist of words, photos, videos, a link. And then you post that tweet for your followers to view.
And are you familiar with the phrase Twitter handle?
I am.
What's a Twitter handle?
A Twitter handle is basically someone's username. So like their @sign.
And are posts to Twitter, are they public or private? Can they be either or both?
They can be either. It depends on the user. You can make it so only people that follow you can view your posts. Or you can make your account public, so anyone that looks you up that has an account can see your posts.
Are you familiar with the term verified account?
I am.
What's a verified account?
So the new Twitter, I think you can just buy a verification status. Back in 2016, the verification status used to be a way of Twitter signaling that this was, in fact, the account that belonged to someone like a politician, a celebrity, someone of prominent status.
Did you review Twitter's user policies and help manual to determine what a verified account was?
Yes.
In connection with this case, were you asked to review public posts made on Twitter from the Twitter handle @RealDonaldTrump?
Yes.
Was that a verified account?
Yes.
Who did you understand the user of that account to be?
Donald Trump.
Did you take any steps to verify that that Twitter handle was associated with Mr. Trump?
So the National Archives maintains and preserves a Twitter account that has the handle at POTUS45, which reposted numerous, if not all, of the posts from the @RealDonaldTrump account. That, combined with the verified status, gave me an idea.
Do you have an understanding of what POTUS45 refers to?
Yes, the 45th President of the United States.
In connection with the case, were you asked to review public posts made on Twitter from the Twitter handle, I am sorry, withdrawn? And you mentioned that you are familiar with Truth Social?
I am.
What is Truth Social?
Truth Social works basically in the same way that Twitter does. It is another social media platform where you can make a post, or I guess a truth, and put that out for your followers to view.
You also reviewed Truth Social's help center and information provided to Truth Social users?
Yes.
Does Truth Social use verified accounts?
They do.
And according to Truth Social, what is a verified account?
A verified account, according to them, means that Truth Social on the back end has done their due diligence to make sure that that account does, in fact, belongs to who it said, and it is not an imposter or somebody else pretending to be that person.
In connection with this case, were you asked to review public posts made on Truth Social from the Truth Social handle at @RealDonaldTrump?
Yes.
Was that a verified account?
Yes.
Who did you understand the user of that account to be?
Donald Trump.
Did you take any steps to verify if that Truth Social handle was associated with Mr. Trump?
On Mr. Trump's campaign site, there is a Truth Social icon that links directly back to that Truth Social account.
And are you familiar with the website called the Wayback Machine?
I am.
Can you describe what that is to the jury?
Yes. So, the Wayback Machine is a digital archive. I think it was founded in like 2001 or something. And it basically allows users to, essentially, go back in time and see what a website looked like on any day in the past.
Can you explain to the jury how you find a particular website from a particular point in time?
Yes. So the way that I do it, for example, I take that website's current viewer, the way it shows up if you were to look it up today, and I enter it into the Wayback Machine search engine, and it will allow you to view the different months or days or years in the past that it has preserved that website's content on. And then you can choose which day of the past you would like to view.
In connection with this case, did you ever use the Wayback Machine to retrieve previously posted versions of news articles?
I did.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review files marked for identification as People's Exhibits 407A through 407E?
Yes.
Are those public posts from the Twitter handle at @RealDonaldTrump?
Yes.
Who created those exhibits?
I did.
And did you create those exhibits using the hashed versions that you retrieved?
I did.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review files marked for identification as People's Exhibits 408A and 408B?
I did.
Were those public posts in the Truth Social handle at @RealDonaldTrump?
Yes.
And who created those exhibits?
I did.
Did you create them based on the hashed versions of the files that you created?
I did.
By the way, before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review the file marked for identification as People's Exhibit 405A?
Yes.
Is 405A a publicly available Washington Post article that you retrieved using the Wayback Machine?
Yes.
And is the file that is marked for identification as 405A an exact copy of what you retrieved?
Yes.
We now offer into evidence People's Exhibits 405.
407A through E and 408A and 408B.
Objection to 408, and if we can approach on one.
Let's take your morning recess. Jurors, if you can step out, please.
Whereupon the jury was excused.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Witnesses excused.
Okay. I want to make sure we have the same exhibits. I have 405A, 407A through E, 408A, and 408B.
Yes.
Tell me what your objection is and to which.
The objection for 405A is just that given Your Honor's ruling this morning, assuming you overruled our hearsay objection, we would just like the opportunity to speak with our client and amongst ourselves about the stipulation, which we haven't got a chance to do.
Do you want to take a minute to do that now?
Sure.
You want to step out for a few minutes?
Yes.
Short recess is taken.
Mr. Blanche?
Your Honor, we continue to have our hearsay objection. Assuming that's overruled, we have agreed with the people to a stipulation, and we have agreed to it. It's going to, assuming the court allows this, we will just read it to the jury. Then we will type it up and mark it as an exhibit.
That's fine. Now, can we pull up the exhibits that you have a hearsay exception to? I just want to look at them quickly.
Sure.
Let's go one by one. 405A.
Well, I still have the objection. So 405A, which is the Washington Post.
When you say hearsay, you are referring to what specifically?
Well, it's the entire, for what the people are offering it for. They are offering it for the date, which is an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth. They are offering it for, I believe, the Washington Post, which is an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth. They are offering it, assuming the content is hearsay, and they are offering it for who authored it, which is an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth. So, I will let the government speak to what else they...
Your Honor, we are offering to withdraw this based on the stipulation.
Say that again.
We are offering to withdraw our request to admit this based on the stipulation.
Okay, let's go to 407.
Beginning with 407A, so here, Your Honor, this would be presumably offered for, again, everything on this document. There is, I think you can see at the bottom, there is the date that it was posted, the time that it was posted. That's an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
And let's look at B.
This is exactly the same thing. Your Honor, just to be clear, I don't know whether they are going to argue it, but there is a lot of information in here, including reposts, quotes, likes, bookmarks, date, time.
And 407A through E, are these all Truth Social posts?
Yes, it is. I am sorry. They are tweets.
They are all Twitter posts.
What are you introducing these for?
We are introducing them for the content of the statements made, as well as who they were made by and the time and date that they were posted. We do not need to admit the markings on the bottom which indicate requotes, posts, likes, and bookmarks.
Okay, very well. And just to back up a little bit, I am satisfied with the foundation that the witness laid as far as reliability. You know, we will take each exhibit one at a time. But overall, I think that the foundation was laid for establishing whose account it was, how she determined that, and what steps she took. Ultimately, the issue of hearsay is it reliable? And for purposes of at least having this discussion and whether I am going to accept each individual exhibit, I am satisfied that it is reliable. What's 408A?
I mean, this is now truth, Your Honor. It is same exact objection. They are going to say to the jury at some point on March 15th, 2023, this truth was sent, and it is a business record. It's being offered for the truth. And there is a specific rule, which is 808, that doesn't allow it to come in this way, with a witness who hasn't said a word about her experience or how the business maintains these records.
Your Honor, again, we are not seeking to admit this as a business record. We are seeking to admit this as a party admission.
How do you get past hearsay of the actual statement?
We believe, as already mentioned, we believe that the witness we are seeking to admit this through has made an adequate foundation and that there is sufficient hallmarks of reliability.
What's the exception to hearsay?
Admission.
Okay, and what's 408B?
This one, Your Honor, we have exactly the same hearsay objection. But actually, we have an absolute relevance objection and an unduly prejudicial objection for the reasons I stated this morning for the information provided to the court.
What's the relevance of that?
So, Your Honor, the relevance of this is the pressure that has been put on witnesses in connection with testifying about the case. This is the same issue that Your Honor addressed on Tuesday, when Your Honor ruled that this is transcript pages 1651 to 1661, that the defendant had opened the door to arguments and evidence about the pressure campaign that the defendant put on witnesses. And Your Honor ruled that we could introduce this type of evidence for two purposes. First, to offset the defense claims that witnesses are benefiting from a willingness to testify. And second, to explain witnesses' initial denials as to certain events in this case.
And it's offered as the exception to hearsay?
Admission.
So, the people are withdrawing 405A, 407A through E are Twitter posts. They are coming in as admissions. 408A is a Truth Social post. It's coming in as an admission. 408B is coming in as an admission. I am satisfied again as to reliability. And going back to my earlier ruling, if you go back to the motions in limine, I had ruled that we would take this up later, that we would have to wait and see what happens. I had not at that time decided that these types of things could come in. However, I subsequently ruled that the door had been opened, and based upon that, I am allowing them to come in. All right, let's get the witness.
Sorry, Your Honor. Just to clarify, we are withdrawing 405A subject to the stipulation. not just generally.
Witness entering, whereupon the witness entered the courtroom and was properly seated. Jury entering, whereupon the jury entered the courtroom and was properly seated.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors are present and properly seated.
People.
Before we resume, I have a stipulation of the parties that I would like to read into the record with the court's permission.
Please.
The parties have stipulated that the Access Hollywood tape referred to during this trial was publicly released by the Washington Post on October 7, 2016, at 4:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The article was authored by David Farentold.
Thank you. Jurors, a stipulation is information that the parties have agreed to without the need to call a witness. It's to be treated exactly the way you would treat any other evidence.
Now, to resume, we offer into evidence what has been marked for identification as People's Exhibits 407A through 407E and 408A and 408B.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection is overruled.
Can we now show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 407A? Ms. Longstreet, is this a post that you retrieved?
Yes.
And what was the date and timestamp shown on the post?
I believe it was October 8th at 12:19 a.m.
Can we please put that back up for the jury, without playing it?
October 8th, 2016 at 12:19 a.m.
What is the written content of the post?
Here is my statement.
All right. Can we now display to the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 407B? Is this another post that you retrieved?
Yes.
What Twitter handle was this posted from?
At Real Donald Trump.
And what is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
I believe it was October 8th at 12:19 p.m.
Can you please put that back up for the jury, without playing it?
October 8th at 12:19 p.m.
What is the written content of the post?
Here is my statement.
We now show the jury what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 407B. Is this another post that you retrieved?
Yes.
What Twitter handle was this posted from?
At Real Donald Trump.
And what is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
I believe it was October 11th at 12:52 p.m.
Can you read the content of the post to the jury?
Yes. The very foul-mouthed Senator John McCain begged for my support during his primary. I gave. He won. Then dropped me over locker room remarks.
We now show the jury what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 407C. Is this another Twitter post you received?
Yes.
What Twitter handle did it come in?
At Real Donald Trump.
What is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
The 15th of October, 2016 at 2:29 p.m.
Can you read the content of the post to the jury?
Nothing ever happened with any of these women totally made up nonsense to steal the election. Nobody has more respect for women than I do.
And can now show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 407D, another Twitter post that you retrieved?
Yep.
What handle is this post from?
At Real Donald Trump.
What is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
The 16th of October, 2016 at 7:36 a.m.
Can you read the content of the post to the jury?
Polls close. But can you believe I lost large number of women voters based on made-up events that never happened? Media rigging election.
And can we show the jury what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 407E? Is this another Twitter post you retrieved?
Yes.
What is the handle it came from?
At Real Donald Trump.
What is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
The 17th of October, 2016 at 8:15 a.m.
Can you read the content of the post to the jury?
Can't believe these phony stories 100% made up by women. Many already proven false and pushed big time by press. Have impact.
Thank you. And can we please show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 408A? Now, is this another social media post?
Yes.
Can you tell what social media platform this is from?
Yes, this is from Truth Social.
And what handle was used for this post?
At Real Donald Trump.
What is the date and timestamp shown on the post?
March 15th, 2023 at 11:32 p.m.
Can you please read the content of the post to the jury?
I did nothing wrong in the Horseface case. I see she showed up in New York today trying to drum up some publicity for herself. I haven't seen or spoken to her. Since I took a picture with her on a golf course in full golf gear, including a hat, close to 18 years ago. She knows nothing about me, other than her con-man lawyer Avenatti and convicted lawyer and felon jailbird Michael Cohen may have schemed up. Never had an affair with her. Just another false acquisition by a sleazebag. Witch hunt.
And finally, can we show People's Exhibit 408B already in evidence to the jury? Is this another Truth Social post that you retrieved?
Yes.
What handle is used?
At Real Donald Trump.
And what is the date and timestamp on this?
August 4th, 2023 at 4:16 p.m.
Can you please read the content of the post to the jury?
If you go after me, I am coming after you.
No further questions.
Your witness.
Good morning, Ms. Longstreet.
Good morning.
Just a few questions. So, you testified that one of your assignments was to review, I think you said, 25 to 30 separate social media handles or accounts. Is that right?
That's about how many I have reviewed in the course of this case.
And you reviewed those because you were instructed to do so by one of the prosecutors?
Yes.
Is one of the handles you reviewed the handle for Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And did you review Michael Cohen's X account?
I did.
Have you reviewed Michael Cohen's TikTok?
Not really, no.
How about, well, let me ask you this. What other social media handles or sites did you review with respect to Michael Cohen?
Twitter. I don't know if you can call the podcast social media, but that might be it.
The podcast, you are talking about the podcast that Michael Cohen hosts.
Yes.
Are there two of them?
I am only talking about one.
Are you talking about one called Mea Culpa?
Yes.
And have you listened to all of the Mea Culpa podcasts?
Absolutely not.
Fair. How did you determine which Mea Culpa podcast to listen to?
I think some were more relevant than others, and some we were instructed to listen to.
And as far as Mr. Cohen's Twitter, did you focus on particular tweets or comments or just follow his handle regularly?
Both.
And was it part of your responsibility to report to the prosecutors what you observed?
Yes.
And did you?
I did.
Did you, I believe you also testified that overall there were, well, how many thousands or tens of thousands of different tweets or Instagram or podcasts do you think you reviewed in connection with this case that you have talked about this morning?
I couldn't give you an exact number. I would say anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 posts.
Was there a time frame that you were assigned to look at?
Well, the time frame of the activity at the center of this case, but also over the last year, since I have been added to the case.
So around 2015 to 2017, is that fair?
Yep.
And then during the course of this investigation, so since the beginning of 2023, is that right?
Yep.
Was it earlier than that, or is that when you started?
I think I started in December of 2022, so just around that time.
So, and of all the thousands that you reviewed, today we looked at 7 a few minutes ago, correct?
Yep.
And did you decide which 7 to show today, or was it the prosecutors who decided?
I am just a paralegal. I apologize.
So it was the prosecutors?
Yes.
And with respect to the 7 exhibits we just looked at that you read into the record, you have never worked at Twitter or X, correct?
Correct.
And you never worked for Truth Social, right?
Correct.
And so, when you were testifying about, for example, the handle, the date and time of the X or the tweet and the Truth Social posts, that was just from what you were observing on the screen and what you describe as your experience on social media, correct?
I don't really understand.
Well, you don't have an independent knowledge from working at Twitter or working at Truth Social of how they go about stamping a tweet or putting a timestamp or a date stamp on a particular tweet before it goes out? You don't have any expertise about that, do you?
No.
The same thing with Truth Social?
That's correct.
So you, like many of us, you just relied on your experience having spent a lot of time reviewing social media in this case.
Yes. With regard to Truth Social posts, those were made while I was actively reviewing that account every single day.
So during 2023, the 2 that we showed you were actively reviewing, so you see when a post is posted and see it when it happens, correct?
Yes.
But again, continuing that, you don't have any independent knowledge, for example, of who actually wrote the Truth Social or the X or the tweet, do you?
That's true. I just know what account it was posted from.
And similarly, you don't have any independent knowledge of why a particular post was made, correct?
No.
So, for example, the last one that we just saw that said something like, if you come after me, I am coming after you, you don't have any idea or knowledge about why that Truth Social handle put that up, do you?
I have my assumptions, but no.
How long have you worked at the district attorney's office?
About to be 2 years.
Have there been any other, is this your primary case?
For the time being.
Has this been your only case this year?
No.
Have there been other cases where you had to look at 25 to 30 different social media accounts, as you have had in this case?
Not as many accounts, but other investigations that required social media to be looked at, yes.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You may step down.
Whereupon the witness was excused.
The next witness, people.
The people call Hope Hicks.
Judge, there is one evidentiary objection.
No speaking objections.
May I approach?
Sure.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Thank you. Judge, I am sorry. We want to put on the record our objection on presidential immunity grounds. I expect there will be testimony from Ms. Hicks related to statements by President Trump while he was President of the United States. Unless you tell me it is necessary, I prefer not to lodge the objections question by question. We object to the subject of her testimony based on the authorities we submitted, and our position being that that testimony is evidence of official acts being presented at a criminal trial against the president, and it should be precluded.
I don't anticipate we will be showing any exhibits that fall within that category. We intend to elicit testimony, and we have briefed at length the argument that the rule of inadmissibility that Mr. Bove just described does not exist and is not a rule. The inadmissibility rule was not a rule that was ever recognized. Several cases that we have cited has held the exact opposite in the analogous context of consular immunity. As we cited in other papers holding that evidence of otherwise immune conduct is nonetheless admissible in a trial regarding criminal conduct for non-immune acts. So, the testimony we intend to elicit involves statements by the defendant, and there is no doctrine that would allow excluding it.
I believe I ruled on this as well. So the objection is noted. I don't think you need to object as to each question.
Thank you, Judge.
We want to note for the record that we may recall Ms. Longstreet as a witness at a later point in the trial. We may recall Ms. Longstreet.
Thank you.
Can you address 218, the email?
We don't intend to admit the parts you identified. There was a question regarding an exhibit that we intended to admit, but only in part. Defense counsel identified the objection for us last night. I have not yet had the opportunity to convey to defense counsels that we only intend to admit the part after Exhibit T that the witness can lay foundation for, and we will exclude that part of the exhibit.
For now.
Yes.
Yes, for now.
Thank you.
Discussion held in open court where the following occurred.
They are getting the witness.
Stay standing. Raise your right hand and face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. State your full name. Spell your last name.
My name is Hope Charlotte Hicks, and my last name is spelled Hicks.
Give your county of residence.
Washington, D.C.
Good morning, Ms. Hicks. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Hicks. Will you please describe your educational background?
Sure, I have a BA in English from Southern Methodist University, and that's it. Very brief.
Please describe your work history after you finished college.
After college, I started working in different PR and marketing jobs. The first notable one was with a firm called Hiltzik Strategies, Hiltzik. And that was a PR firm that specializes in crisis communications and working with well-known individuals. After that, while I was working there, I met Ivanka Trump and started to help with public relations surrounding her personal brand. And after a little bit of time, I started to work with the Trump family on some of the Trump hospitality initiatives. And I was enjoying it so much that I was offered a position at the Trump Organization and dubbed it as the opportunity to join the company full-time.
When did you begin work at the Trump Organization full-time?
In October of 2014.
And I'm not sure you mentioned what year you received your undergraduate degree. What year was that?
I graduated from college in 2010.
You began working at the Trump Organization about 4 years after you finished college?
That's right.
And at some point, after beginning to work at the Trump Organization, did you also start working for the Trump campaign?
Yes. Shortly after I joined the Trump Organization, Mr. Trump at the time, Mr. Trump said that he would be exploring a run for president. And we began doing that in January of 2015. And then just a few months later, in March of 2015, he formed a formal exploratory committee and announced he was running as a candidate for president in June of 2015.
What do you currently do for work?
I am a communications consultant. So I have my own company. I do what I have always done, which is give advice to individuals or companies looking for strategic communications advice.
Are you here today in response to a subpoena from the district attorney's office?
I am.
Are you represented by counsel here today?
I am.
Who is paying for your lawyer?
I am.
In your current role as a consultant, is the defendant Donald Trump a client?
He's not.
Do you have any current professional relationship with Mr. Trump?
I don't.
When is the last time you were in communication with Mr. Trump?
Sometime in the fall of 2022.
2022?
Yes.
Please move a little bit forward to the microphone so we can all hear you.
Sorry.
Now, you mentioned that you began working at the Trump Organization in October of 2014. Is that right?
Yes.
What was your role at the Trump Organization?
I was the director of communications.
What were some of the tasks and responsibilities you held as director of communications at the Trump Organization?
Coordinated all of the public relations material, marketing collateral for the real estate, hospitality, and entertainment businesses, which at the time were thriving. This is very deep now that I can hear on the microphone. I apologize. It's going to take a second to get used to. I worked a lot of events, different initiatives to help publicize the various properties, the golf courses, and just the growth of the business, as well as the executives of the company, primarily Mr. Trump, Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric.
In your job as Director of Communications at the Trump Organization, did you have occasion to meet with Donald Trump?
I did.
About how often did you meet with him?
Maybe once a week at first, usually observing, colleagues working with him. And then as we transitioned just a few months later into the political work, I met with him more regularly.
As your experience at the Trump Organization grew, and as you began working on both Trump Organization matters and campaign matters, eventually how often did you come to meet with him in a typical day?
I probably met with him every day.
And were those scheduled meetings, unscheduled meetings, or both?
Both.
Were you ever called into Mr. Trump's office when he was meeting with other people?
Yes.
Give us an example of how that might come about.
He's just the kind of person. He is a very good multitasker and a very hard worker. He is always doing many things at once. He might be having a conversation with someone, and it will remind him to follow up on something else. He'll want to share something with the group that he is meeting with and want to provide them with. Maybe if it's a political meeting, he wants to provide them with poll numbers. If it's a real estate meeting, he will want to provide them with any positive press surrounding the property, the sales of the property, the value of the property, things like that.
In this period of time, 2015, was it unusual for you to be in and out of his office during other meetings?
No.
In your role as Director of Communications, did you also speak to Mr. Trump by phone?
Yes.
About how often did you speak to him by phone?
Well, again, once the campaign work started, my role was a little bit different. If we're talking, rather than do it by title, we will do it by date, if that works for you. Beginning January 2015, I started to speak to him more regularly. I would say about June of 2015, I spoke with him on the phone every day if we weren't able to communicate in person.
How did you reach him by phone when you spoke to him?
I would usually call the office and be connected, but he had a cell phone or a home phone number as well.
Focusing on your role as Director of Communications, who did you report to at the Trump Organization?
Everybody that works there in some sense reports to Mr. Trump. It's a very big and successful company, but it's really run like a small family business in certain ways. And Mr. Trump and Don and Eric and Ivanka were very involved in the business, and so people reported to the 4 family members.
You mentioned a few names there. I want to make sure the record is clear who they are. You mentioned Don, Eric, and Ivanka. Can you say who they are?
They're Mr. Trump's children.
Is that Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka?
Yes.
They also worked at the Trump Organization when you worked there?
Yes.
Are you familiar with someone named Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Who is Mr. Schiller?
Keith was Mr. Trump's bodyguard.
How do you know Mr. Schiller?
He attended events with us and really served as sort of a security liaison for Mr. Trump at big public events and just generally helping to keep him safe.
Through your work, did you have occasion to observe the kind of relationship that Mr. Schiller had with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
Close.
Are you familiar with someone named Rona Graff?
Yes.
Who is Rona Graff?
Rona was Mr. Trump's executive assistant.
How do you know her?
I worked with her during my time at the Trump Organization.
As Mr. Trump's executive assistant, what did her role involve?
She was crucial to how everything ran on the 26th floor. She had a lot of institutional knowledge about different projects and Mr. Trump's business relationships, his network, his likes and dislikes in terms of scheduling. And she also was helpful with his media engagements up to that point. She would help facilitate those media engagements for him.
You mentioned something about the 26th floor. Can you tell the jury what you mean by that?
The floor in Trump Tower where Mr. Trump's office was, and Rona's office was as well.
And in addition to what you just said, did you have occasion to observe Ms. Graff's relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
One of mutual respect.
Are you familiar with someone named Alan Weisselberg?
Yes.
Who is Mr. Weisselberg?
Alan was the CFO of the Trump Organization.
And by CFO, do you mean Chief Financial Officer?
Yes.
How do you know him?
I worked with him during my time there.
Can you describe a little bit what kind of work-related interactions you had with Mr. Weisselberg?
Sure. Anything that had to do with finances, Alan was involved in. During this time while we were starting to work on the campaign, he was helpful in doing things like the personal financial disclosure that was required. He was helpful, Mr. Trump self-financed his campaign. He would loan the campaign money. And Mr. Weisselberg Allen was helpful in that process, in making sure that we had an accurate description of that for the press.
You mentioned a required financial disclosure in that answer. Can you say a little bit more what you understood that to be?
I don't really remember that much about it. Just a requirement of candidates to file a financial disclosure, share their assets, their worth, I guess. I can't remember exactly, but I know that was something we did. We put out a press release in addition to the filing itself, and Alan was helpful with that.
Did you have occasion through your work with Mr. Weisselberg to observe his relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
So, mutual respect. He had been an employee at the Trump Organization for a long time, and so, like Rona, he had a lot of institutional knowledge. He was a trusted person there.
Did Weisselberg report directly to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Are you familiar with someone named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Did Mr. Cohen work for the Trump Organization when you began working there?
Yes.
And that was around October 2014?
Yes.
Had you met Mr. Cohen before you began working at the Trump Organization?
I believe so. There was about a 6 or 8 month period where I was working at a different PR firm on hotels and golf-related projects for the Trump Organization. I believe we met during that time.
What was Mr. Cohen's role at the Trump Organization?
He was an attorney.
Do you know what kind of work he did?
Not specifically, other than I know he was involved in a couple of the license deals for some of the hotel projects, and maybe some of the entertainment pieces as well, like the Miss Universe pageant.
You mentioned a minute ago that shortly after you started working at the Trump Organization, you began to work for Mr. Trump's campaign for president. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about how that came about?
Yes. So, Mr. Trump, one day he said, "We're going to Iowa," and I don't really know why, but after that first trip to Iowa, obviously it was clear he was exploring a potential political run. And we started to travel regularly over the next couple of weeks and months to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Washington. He would give speeches, meet with voters, attend different panels and submit discussions, media interviews, etc. He eventually made the decision to formalize that, with an exploratory committee at first, and then announced he was going to run for president in June.
Is that June of 2015?
Yes.
Do you remember when that initial Iowa trip was?
Sometime in January of 2015.
Did there come a time that you were offered an official role in the campaign?
Yes, at some point. I think it was sometime around that first trip. Mr. Trump, I think he might have been joking, but said I was going to be the campaign press secretary. I had no experience and worked at the company, not on the campaign, so I didn't take it very seriously. But eventually I just started spending so much time working on the campaign that I became a member of the campaign team, and I was the press secretary.
Tell us a little bit about what your duties were as a press secretary for the campaign.
Sure. So just helping communicate the campaign message, a lot of work around press releases and planning events, a lot of media interviews, and just kind of being a liaison for all of those different things, and helping to facilitate anything that was external-facing for the campaign.
In addition to external communications, were there internal communications as well?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, can you describe for the jury in a little bit more detail what your interactions with the press and other campaign staff involved?
Like I said, just trying to get the message out. A lot of incoming questions about Mr. Trump, about his candidacy, where we were going to be and when, what we were speaking about. A lot of questions about his businesses. It was kind of a constant flow of incoming questions. So I managed all of those and tried to respond to everybody in a timely manner with accurate information. But yeah, that was a big part of it.
Was there also a communications team for the campaign?
At that point, no. It was just me and Mr. Trump, who is better than anybody at communications and branding.
Eventually, did the campaign add communication staff?
Later in the general election, we did have a larger staff, yes.
Did your role involve managing or leading that communication staff?
I wasn't really managing them because I was on the road every day. So I wasn't in the office sort of looking after the rest of the group. But, definitely getting guidance where I could on, daily team phone calls and other things. We worked together as a team, and there were some other people on board at that point that would stay in the office each day and look after the team.
In your role as press secretary, did you consider it important to stay informed about what other political figures were saying about Mr. Trump's candidacy?
Yes. Any news that was relevant to the campaign was consumed regularly.
And are you familiar with the term talking points? Is that a term that is used in the campaign context?
Yes.
What are talking points?
They're typically just a summary of messages in maybe a bullet point format. Maybe they're for people to remember. Kind of just like, You want to make sure everyone is on the same page about something here, the talking points about a certain topic. If you can work these into your conversations or your media interview or your next event, here they are. So they would change quite frequently. There were some, more general points, but we would update them daily based on what Mr. Trump was doing, what kind policy speeches he was giving, what kind of campaign speech he was giving.
Did you prepare or coordinate the coordination of those talking points?
Sometimes, yes.
You may already have answered this in your earlier discussion. Who did you report to as press secretary in the campaign?
Reported to Mr. Trump.
And how frequently during the campaign period in 2015 did you speak with Mr. Trump as part of your role as the press secretary?
Every day.
Did you speak by telephone?
Yes.
And in person?
Yes.
In your experience, how involved was Mr. Trump in the press aspects of his campaign?
He was very involved.
Did he weigh in on media responses?
He did.
And who on the campaign was responsible for the overall messaging strategy?
I would say that Mr. Trump was responsible. He knew what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it, and we were all just following his lead. So, I think that he deserves the credit for, the different messages that the campaign focused on in terms of the agenda that he put forth.
Was Mr. Trump focused on press coverage of the campaign?
Yes.
And in your role as press secretary, did you often make statements on behalf of the Trump campaign?
I did.
Did you check with Mr. Trump before making statements on behalf of the campaign?
Yes.
Did you check with him before making statements about him in particular?
Absolutely.
Did you travel with Mr. Trump during the campaign?
Yes.
How often?
Almost every day.
Who else traveled with you and Mr. Trump during the campaign?
A small group of staffers.
Are there any particular staff members or types of staff people that traveled regularly?
Yes. You want me to name names?
Just give us general job functions.
Someone that output social media. Someone that helped a little bit with speech writing. And I am trying to think. There was a very small group of us. It depends where we were going. Maybe they would have someone, that was more on the fundraising end of things. The core staff was very limited, though.
Did Keith Schiller travel with Mr. Trump during the campaign?
Yes.
If someone wanted to reach Mr. Trump while he was traveling with the campaign, do you have an understanding of who they would contact?
Yeah. Mr. Trump was reachable when he wasn't doing rallies and interviews. He had a phone and he could be reached. But Keith was also helpful in facilitating phone calls.
And by Keith, you are referring to Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Did you send text messages in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
And receive text messages too?
Yes.
What phone did you use to send and receive text messages for the campaign?
The phone number.
Well, why don't you tell the jury? Did you use a personal phone or campaign phone?
It was my personal phone.
And without giving me anything other than the last 4 digits, can you let us know the last 4 digits of the phone number?
226.
Did you also make phone calls in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
Did you receive phone calls as well?
Yes.
Did you use your personal number for those campaign-related phone calls?
Yes.
And did you also send emails in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
Did you have a campaign email address?
Yes.
What was the campaign email address you used?
I think it was hicks@donaldtrump.com.
What was the campaign email domain? jdonaldtrump.com?
I believe so, yeah.
Do you know someone named David Pecker?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Pecker?
I know him as the publisher of American Media. It's a group of publications, and the editor of the National Enquirer. I had been introduced to him in a previous job at Hiltzik Strategies. I had met with him to talk about different opportunities throughout his American Media Group for clients, and then I reconnected with him at some point as he was a friend Mr. Trump's.
So you were aware that Mr. Pecker and Mr. Trump had a relationship?
I knew they were friends, yes.
And how did you become aware of that relationship? How did you become aware they were friends?
I don't recall specifically, but at some point I realized that.
You testified earlier that as part of your job, you were sometimes in and out of Mr. Trump's office when he was having other meetings. Is that right?
Yes.
Were you ever in and out of his office when Mr. Pecker was meeting with Mr. Trump in Trump Tower?
I don't have a recollection of that, but it's certainly possible.
You have seen him in Trump Tower before, Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
During the campaign, were you ever present phone calls between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
Can you describe those phone calls?
One of them was, I think, shortly after the National Enquirer published a piece about Ben Carson, and I just overheard a conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker, who was on speakerphone, and Mr. Trump was congratulating him on the great reporting.
What was the article about Dr. Carson about?
Medical malpractice.
Did you hear Mr. Trump say anything in particular on this phone call with Mr. Pecker?
I think he was just congratulating David on a great investigative piece.
You know, sometimes he would say things like, "This is Pulitzer worthy." I kind of recall vaguely that is something that he said.
Was that the only time you heard or were present for a phone call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker in this time period?
It's the most vivid recollection of everything I have. I think a similar conversation took place sometime a few months later, also just praising some of the reporting that the National Enquirer was doing. I think maybe around the time there was a story about Ted Cruz.
Do you recall what the coverage about Senator Cruz involved?
I think it was something about how his father may have been involved with Lee Harvey Oswald or something like that.
What, if anything, did you hear Mr. Trump say during that phone call?
Nothing remarkable. Just similar to what he had said the last time I had overheard a conversation. Great reporting.
At some point during the campaign, did Mr. Trump become the Republican nominee for president?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
July 19th of 2016.
And so moving forward in time from the July 2016 period to the fall, were you still press secretary for the campaign?
Yes.
Had your responsibilities changed since the beginning of the campaign?
Just a little bit because we had more people to be helpful. So there were more hands on deck. It wasn't just a solo operation. But in terms of my role with Mr. Trump, nothing had changed.
So how frequently were you interacting with Mr. Trump during this time period? Now we're in the fall of 2016.
We were traveling every day for the campaign.
Describe for the jury what a typical day was like in this time period?
Sure. So we were based here in New York, and we would usually leave Trump Tower at about 7 in the morning. We would go to LaGuardia and get on Mr. Trump's plane, and we could make, somewhere between 2 and 4, sometimes 5 stops in a day. Typically a couple of rallies and then maybe 1 or 2 other events like going to visit small business. Just getting out, meeting the voters. He was doing a lot of rallies, interviews all day, every day.
And did you typically return to New York City at the end of the day?
Yes. Most of the time we did. There were some occasions where we were heading to the West Coast. It was going to make more sense to stay overnight somewhere. But most days we would come back to Trump Tower at the end of the day. Midnight or something like that.
Are you familiar with something that came to be known as the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
When did you first find out about the Access Hollywood tape?
It would have been in the afternoon of October 7th.
Of 2016?
Yes.
How long before the general election was that?
A month, maybe a little less than a month.
How did you first find out about it?
I received an email from the Washington Post asking for comment.
Who was the Washington Post reporter who sent you that email?
David Fahrenthold.
Where were you when you received it?
I was in my office on the 14th floor of Trump Tower.
Can we display just for the witness, the court and counsel, People's 218, and please display only from the middle of page 2 to the end? This is a document that has been marked as People's 218. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
The email I received.
The email you received from David Fahrenthold?
Yes.
Is that an exact copy of the email you received?
Yes.
Can we scroll up to display the email just from the bottom of page 1 and only showing that portion to the witness and counsel? Can we display the portion that starts forwarding message? Thank you. Do you recognize that email?
Yes.
What is it?
That is me forwarding the reporter's email to other campaign leadership.
Is that an exact copy of the email that you sent forwarding that email?
Yes.
I offer People's 218 into evidence, consisting only of the portion from the very bottom of page 1 through the end of the exhibit that I just displayed for the witness.
Subject to the objections we discussed, we have no further objection to the 205 email and the 129.
Your objection is noted. People's 218 is accepted into evidence.
Thank you. Please display for everyone the email starting on page 2. Ms. Hicks, is this the email that you just described receiving from the reporter at the Washington Post?
Yes.
When did you receive the email?
1:29 p.m.
Can we blow up the portion showing thank you? What is the subject of the email?
Urgent Washington Post query.
Can we display the third paragraph of this email beginning in the video? Can we zoom in on that portion, please? Taking a look at that paragraph that should be displayed on your screen, beginning in the video, what does the email describe?
Just a video where Mr. Trump and Billy Bush are having an inappropriate conversation about a woman.
And does Mr. Fahrenthold also say in this paragraph that he is sending you a transcript of the tape?
Yes, it was included in the email.
So if we can take that down, zoom out, and scroll down and enlarge the portion that begins, here's the transcript. Is that the transcript that you are referring to?
Yes.
Can you take a minute and read it just to yourself and let me know when you are done reading it?
I finished it.
Can we go to the next page, please? Can we zoom in on the first half of that page? And can you read that to yourself and let us know when you are done?
I'm good.
Okay, let me ask you, have you had an occasion to review this email before testifying today?
Yes.
Have you seen or heard the Access Hollywood tape as well?
Yes.
Does this transcript reflect the content of the tape?
Yes.
What was your first reaction when you received this? You can go ahead and take it down.
I was concerned. Very concerned. Yeah, I was concerned about the contents of the email. I was concerned about the lack of time to respond. I was concerned that we had a transcript, but not a tape. There was a lot at play.
Did you also forward the email to anyone else in the campaign?
I did.
Can we redisplay People's 218, showing only from the bottom of page 1 to the top of page 2, showing the forwarding message without showing anything before, above the forwarding, please? Is that the email that you forwarded?
Yes.
Who did you send it to?
I sent it to other campaign leadership.
Did that include Jason Miller, David Bossy?
Yes.
Can you tell us who else you sent it to?
Jason Miller, Jason, Kellyanne Conway, and Stephen Bannon.
Who is Kellyanne Conway?
She was the campaign manager.
Who is Stephen Bannon?
He was sort of a co-campaign manager.
Who is Jason Miller?
He was helping with the communications.
Who is David Bossy?
I don't know what his title was, but he was helpful, almost like a political director.
And in the email you forwarded, did you write, need to hear the tape? 1, need to hear the tape to be sure. 2, deny, deny, deny.
It's a reflex. I obviously was a little shocked and not realizing that the entirety of the transcript was in the email. So strategy number 2 was going to be a little more difficult. But yes, that is an email that I sent.
Did you mean a little more difficult because it's hard to deny a tape when there is a full transcript of it that you already have?
Objection.
Sustained.
Withdrawn. Did you do anything else after you sent that message?
I went to find the group who was on a different floor and talked to them.
What floor was the group on that you went to speak with further?
They were on the 25th floor.
Who was present when you went upstairs to the 25th floor?
Jason, Kellyanne, Stephen was there. I believe Jared Kushner was there. I believe Stephen Miller was there. Maybe Chris Christie. The whole group, they were practicing for a debate prep.
Was Jeff Sessions also present for the debate prep?
Jeff was there that day at some point. I can't remember if he was there when I went upstairs or if he came a little later. But I do remember seeing him that day.
Where on the 25th floor was the debate prep taking place?
In the conference room.
Can you tell the jury a little more about what happened when you went upstairs?
It's a glass conference room. When I get off the elevator, there is sort of a waiting area, but you can see into the conference room and everyone can see out of the conference room. So I motioned for Jason, a couple of people I sent the email to come out and speak to me, to try not to disrupt the debate prep. And obviously, the sight of the 6 of us kind of gathered, 5 or 6 of us gathered out there, was a sign that, something was afoot. And Mr. Trump asked us to come into the conference room at some point and share with him what we were discussing.
Tell the jury what happened next.
I shared the email with Mr. Trump, sort of verbally, and we were at the time, based on the conversation outside the conference room, trying to get a copy of the audio or the tape to assess the situation further. We weren't sure how to respond yet. We were kind of just trying to gather more information and everyone was observing the shock of it.
When you say you shared the content verbally, did you read Mr. Trump the email you received from Mr. Farenthold?
I read him the email and I have a vague recollection of starting to read the transcript. And then he finished reading it himself, I believe.
Did you hand him the email for him to read?
Yes, that's my recollection.
And what, if anything, did he say?
He said that didn't sound like something he would say.
Did he ask to see the actual tape?
Yes.
At some point, did Mr. Farenthold send you the actual video?
This is where it gets as little fuzzy. I can't remember if we saw the video before it was published or not. Obviously, we saw the tape in a matter of minutes, whether it was from the reporter directly or when his story posted shortly thereafter.
So at some point you saw the video. Were you with Mr. Trump when that happened?
Yes.
Was Mr. Trump upset?
Yes, he was.
Fair to say he was as mad as you've ever seen him.
Objection, Judge.
Sustained.
What was your first reaction when you heard the tape?
Just a little stunned. It's hard to describe. Yeah, it was definitely concerning, and I had, a good sense that this was going to be a massive story and sort of dominate the news cycle for the next several days at least.
Were you concerned about the effect it would have on the campaign?
Yes, it was a damaging development.
Why was it a damaging development?
It just didn't feel like the kind of story. It obviously wasn't helpful. But there were a lot of layers to it that complicated where we were trying to go with the campaign. This was kind of pulling us backwards in a way that was going to be hard to overcome.
In those initial conversations with Mr. Trump and other campaign staff, did anyone else the group express concern that the tape would be damaging?
Yes, I think there was consensus among us all that the tape was damaging and this was a crisis.
Were you concerned at the time about the effect that Access Hollywood tape would have on the female voters?
In that moment, no. You know, maybe a couple of hours later, something that crossed my mind, maybe the next day. But just trying to get your bearings in a moment like that, there is a lot going on. Not in that moment, but certainly eventually that was something that was raised.
At some point, did the conversation turn to how the campaign should respond?
Yes.
Tell the jury a little bit more about that discussion.
I don't really have a strong recollection of that conversation. But, you know, I know Mr. Trump felt like this wasn't good. But it was also just like two guys talking privately, locker room talk. It wasn't anything to get so upset over. Certainly he didn't want to offend anybody, but I think he felt like this was like pretty standard stuff for two guys chatting with each other.
And so, as you developed an initial campaign response, did Mr. Trump have thoughts on what that initial campaign response should be?
He did. He always liked to weigh in on responses.
Did you prepare a short written statement in response?
The campaign put out a short statement. I can't remember who prepared it, but Mr. Trump definitely had input on it. We were all working together in the conference room.
Can we display for the witness, counsel, and the court only People's 313? Can you zoom in so the witness can see the middle of that page? Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is this document?
It was the first statement that we put out in response to the tape.
Is that the statement that you just mentioned as the initial response?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of that statement?
As far as I can tell, yes.
And where's the statement? Where was the statement posted?
I presume on the campaign website and any other channels.
Can you back up a little bit, please, and show us? Does that help you identify where that statement was posted?
It was on the website.
I offer People's 313 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 313 is accepted into evidence.
Please go ahead and display that publicly. Displayed. Ms. Hicks, is this the written statement that you just mentioned?
Yes.
When was it issued?
Sometime in the afternoon. If I got the query at 1:30, the story was being posted by 3:30. I think it went out sometime between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, if I had to guess.
Can you read the statement, please?
Sure. It says, "This was locker room banter, a private conversation that took place many years ago. Bill Clinton has said far worse to me on the golf course, not even close. I apologize to anyone who is offended."
Go ahead and take that down. Did you also record and release a short video later that day?
Yes, the campaign did.
That video is in evidence as People's 407.
Whereupon the referred to video was played in open court.
I pretended to be someone that I'm not. I've said and done things I regret, and the words released today on this more than a decade-old video are one of them. Anyone who knows me knows these words don't reflect who I am. I said it, I was wrong, and I apologize. I've traveled the country talking about change for America, but my travels have also changed me. I've spent time with grieving mothers who've lost their children, laid off workers whose jobs have gone to other countries, and people from all walks of life who just want a better future. I have gotten to know the great people of our country, and I've been humbled by the faith they've placed in me. I pledge to be a better man tomorrow and will never, ever let you down. Let's be honest, we're living in the real world. This is nothing more than a distraction from the important issues we're facing today. We are losing our jobs, we're less safe than we were 8 years ago, and Washington is totally broken. Hillary Clinton and her kind have run our country into the ground. I've said some foolish things, but there's a big difference between the words and actions of other people. Bill Clinton has actually abused women, and Hillary has bullied, attacked, shamed, and intimidated his victims. We will discuss this more in the coming days. See you at the debate on Sunday.
Is that the first portion of the video statement that you just mentioned?
Yes.
Did you participate in drafting or filming that statement?
I was present, yes.
Can we play the last portion of the video, please?
Whereupon the referred to video was played in open court.
Now, Ms. Hicks, does this draw distinction between his own words and the actions of other people?
Yes.
In the initial statement we just looked at, People's 313, that also referred to the Access Hollywood tape as banter?
Yes.
Is it correct that those two statements reflect Mr. Trump's understanding as to the right response strategy to the video initially?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Did you have an understanding from the written statement and the video that Mr. Trump believed it was important to distinguish between words and behavior?
I don't remember thinking that at the time, but I don't think it's incorrect.
Okay. And around that time, did you also discuss withdrawn? You mentioned that you anticipated that there would be an immediate and significant media reaction, right?
Yes.
What was the immediate media response?
It was intense. It dominated coverage for, I would say the 36 hours leading up to the debate. At the time I got the email in the office at 1:30 in the afternoon on Friday, we were anticipating a Category 4 hurricane making landfall somewhere on the East Coast. And I don't think anybody remembers where or when that hurricane made landfall. It was all Trump all the time for the next 36 hours.
The Access Hollywood pushed the hurricane off the news?
Yes.
You testified earlier that during the campaign, you stayed informed about what other political leaders were saying about Mr. Trump's candidacy. Is that right?
Yes.
Did any prominent Republicans condemn Mr. Trump's behavior on the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
Can you describe any of those statements that you remember?
Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney, sort of the usual. Anytime if there was anything remotely controversial, the group that felt they had to weigh in would come out and give statements. It's pretty standard. But these were particularly, sharply worded statements.
Who is Paul Ryan?
At the time, he was the Speaker of the House.
Did he disinvite Mr. Trump from a campaign event the next day in Wisconsin?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
I can't remember. It's a little bit of a more nuanced response to that. I'm happy to share, but...
Please.
I believe, we were still invited to attend, but sort of. The programming had changed, and it was a clear effort to distance himself from Mr. Trump with a new program schedule. So I think Mr. Trump ultimately made the decision to do something else.
Did Speaker Ryan say he was sickened by Mr. Trump's behavior?
I don't remember that, but it sounds like something he would say.
Who was Mitch McConnell at the time?
The majority leader of the Senate.
Did Senator McConnell have a public response?
He did.
What did Senator McConnell say?
Along the same lines. I don't recall exact words, but disappointed, things like that.
Would seeing anything in particular refresh your recollection as to what Senator McConnell said?
Sure.
I'm going to display for the witness, the court, and counsel the document number Danny, DNJ 00160215, which I will mark People's 5097 for identification. Can you display the first page just for this group? Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Please advance to the third page. Let's focus on page 3.
I see it.
Okay. Does that refresh your recollection as to what Senator McConnell said?
Yes.
What did he say?
That it was repugnant and unacceptable.
Do you know, you mentioned Mitt Romney as well?
Yes.
Who was Mitt Romney at the time?
He was the Republican nominee in 2012.
And you mentioned Mr. Romney put out a statement as well.
Yes.
What was his statement?
I think something like disgraceful, disgusting, hang along those lines.
Would seeing an article refresh your recollection as it Mr. Romney said?
Sure.
Can we go ahead and see that and display page 3, please? For the record, I'm showing 5090 again, just for the witness, counsel, and parties. Does that refresh your recollection as to how Mr. Romney responded?
Yes, he said it was vile.
Vile. You can go ahead and take that down, thank you. Who is John McCain?
He's a senator.
Objection, Judge.
Sustained.
Are you aware of any other prominent Republican leaders who made any other statements?
Objection.
Sustained.
You mentioned Speaker Ryan a minute ago.
Uh-huh.
At a certain point, did Speaker Ryan have a conference call with members of the House?
This was, I think, a weekly occurrence. So yes, he would have them on a weekly basis, and I believe they took place on Mondays. I could be wrong about that. But there was one Monday after the October 9th debate.
Do you have any understanding of any comments that Speaker Ryan said on that call?
I wasn't on the call.
Objection, and may I be heard at sidebar?
Yes, please approach.
Whereupon the following proceedings were held at sidebar.
I understand that there's a place for some of this type of evidence at this trial, which is why I didn't object to the first 3 or 4. My objection at this point is that it's cumulative and unduly prejudicial. So, we object to further questioning the party on public reactions to the Access Hollywood tape.
Your Honor, public reaction to the Access Hollywood tape is a critical part of the evidence in the case. We not only briefed it, but it's important to show the impact on the campaign.
I agree. I think that you've gone pretty far along on this. What do you expect to elicit from this meeting?
That the Speaker of the House told other members of the caucus that they were free to cut loose from Mr. Trump and free to endorse or not endorse as they see fit.
This is all hearsay. If we're going to probe that call, I would ask it happen outside the presence of the jurors and they don't hear the call.
I'll sustain the objection.
Whereupon the following proceedings took place in open court.
The objection is sustained.
Did you speak to Michael Cohen around the time the Access Hollywood tape was released?
I spoke to Michael on Saturday, October 8th.
What was the substance of your conversation with Mr. Cohen?
I was calling to ask him to chase down a rumor I had heard with a contact he was familiar with in the media.
And without giving me any details at all, can you say very generally what that rumor was?
Just that there may be another tape that would be problematic for the campaign.
When you reached out to Mr. Cohen to ask for his help bringing down that rumor, were you following up in part because of the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes, of course. I didn't want anyone to be blindsided. I wanted to have an understanding of, what material was out there that we needed to prepare for.
And what, if anything, did you ask Mr. Cohen to do?
I asked him to call this friend of his and ask about the existence of the tape, and then let me know if there was, in fact, a tape, what was on it, and when we could expect it to be published.
Okay. And did Mr. Cohen follow up on that request?
I don't really remember the conversation where we closed the loop on that, but I believe he did make the phone call and, there was no such tape regardless, but he sort of chased that down for me.
In the video we just saw, did Mr. Trump mention, "We'll see you at the debate in the coming days"?
Yes.
When was that debate scheduled to take place?
Sunday, October 9th.
Was that a presidential debate?
Yes, it was the second presidential debate.
Where was it?
St. Louis.
Who were the moderators for that debate?
Anderson Cooper and Martha Radatz.
Did you travel with Mr. Trump to the debate?
Yes.
Were you present for the debate?
Yes.
What did the Access Hollywood come up during the debate?
It did, yes.
Did the moderators ask Mr. Trump about it?
They did.
And did you have an understanding from those questions whether the Access Hollywood tape was a significant campaign issue?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Sure. Did you have withdrawn? How early in the debate discussion did the Access Hollywood tape come up?
I believe it was one of the first questions of the debate.
And when he was asked at the debate about the Access Hollywood tape, how did Mr. Trump respond?
He said that, he reiterated that this was locker room talk. Just talk. Words, not actions.
Shortly after the Access Hollywood tape was published, and without elaborating or giving any details, did you become aware of reports regarding Mr. Trump's behavior with women?
After the campaign, sorry. After the debate, I think it was the next evening, Monday evening, we were contacted by the New York Times. They were writing a story about...
Let me interrupt you there. Sorry. Were there reports regarding Mr. Trump's behavior?
After the debate, yes.
Okay. And was this around the middle of October 2016?
Yes.
So how long before the election was that?
2.5 weeks, 3 weeks.
During this period of time, in the middle of October 2016, was Mr. Trump traveling for rallies?
Yes.
Did you travel with him to those rallies?
Yes.
Did you attend a rally in Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes.
When was that rally?
I want to say October 15th.
Did Mr. Trump give a speech at that rally?
Yes.
Let's bring up People's 409B, which is in evidence, and we'll play a short clip from that.
Whereupon an exhibit plays on the screens.
These are all horrible lies, all fabrications, and we can't let them change the most important election in our lifetimes. If 5% of the people think it's true, and maybe 10% think we don't win.
Do you recognize that event?
Yes.
Is that a video of the event in Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes.
And are you familiar with Mr. Trump's statement on that video?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that in this period, Mr. Trump was concerned that these reports could hurt his standing with others?
Yes.
Let's, at this time in the fall of 2016, did Mr. Trump have a Twitter account?
Yes.
What was the username for that Twitter account?
@RealDonaldTrump.
Did Mr. Trump post about the campaign, about his 2016 run for office?
Yes.
Was that frequently?
Every day.
Did you read what Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter about the campaign?
Yes.
Did he consider Twitter an important way to communicate with voters?
Definitely.
Who was authorized to post? Withdrawn. Who was authorized to post from the @RealDonaldTrump Twitter account?
Mr. Trump. And I think there was just one other staff member that, could post things that Mr. Trump approved.
Who was that staff member?
His name is Dan Scavino.
And he was authorized to post things only with Mr. Trump's approval?
Yes.
So any language on a Twitter post in this time period is Mr. Trump's language. Either he posted or approved it?
Objection.
Overruled.
That's my understanding, yes.
We discussed earlier the response of some elected officials to the Access Hollywood tape. Do you know what Mr. Trump's reaction was to some of those incidents?
Yeah, I think he was frustrated. But again, it was not unusual to have any of those individuals speaking out and saying negative things about Mr. Trump, especially in response to, controversy. That was pretty typical.
Can we show People's 407B in evidence? We can display it to everyone. It's in evidence. Go ahead and zoom in. Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Does this tweet read, "The very foul-mouthed Senator John McCain begged for my support during his primary. I gave, he won, then dropped me over locker room remarks"?
Yes.
What does "then drop me over locker room remarks" refer to?
I think it means he withdrew his endorsement after that Access Hollywood tape.
You can take that down. Did Mr. Trump also post statements on Twitter regarding reports of his behavior that we discussed?
Yes.
Can we show People's 407C in evidence, please? Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in the tweet?
Nothing ever happened with any of these women. Totally made up nonsense to steal the election. Nobody has more respect for women than me.
Take that down. Can we just play People's 407D in evidence? You can zoom in. Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in this tweet?
Polls close. But can you believe I lost large numbers of women voters based on made-up events that never happened? Media rigging election.
Take that down. One more. Can we show People's 407 in evidence and zoom in for the witness? Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in this tweet?
Can't believe these totally phony stories. 100% made up by women, many already proven false and pushed big time by press, have impact.
Have you ever heard of someone named Karen McDougal?
Yes.
When did you first hear the name Karen McDougal?
November 4th, 2016.
And in what context did you first hear the name Karen McDougal?
I received an inquiry from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Asking questions about her and, the National Enquirer.
Who was the reporter you heard from?
Michael Rothfeld.
Have you ever heard of someone named Stormy Daniels?
She was mentioned in the same story, the November 4th, 2016 story. And I had heard of her one other time before that.
What's the other time before that you had first heard Stormy Daniels?
A year prior, November 2015. Mr. Trump and some security guys on the plane were telling a story about a celebrity golf tournament and some of the participants in the tournament, and her name came up. She was there with one of the other participants that Mr. Trump had played with that day, was my understanding of the story.
Where were you during that conversation?
We were on one of Mr. Trump's planes.
Now, you mentioned that you first heard of Karen McDougal when the Wall Street Journal reached out about an article that you said was being published. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Where were you when you first heard about the potential article of the Wall Street Journal?
Also on Mr. Trump's plane. I think we had just landed in Ohio. And Mr. Trump was going to get off the plane and do a hangar rally where, we don't travel anywhere. He just does a rally on the tarmac of the airport sometimes, with the airport hangar as a cover for the audience. So we just landed in Ohio. He was going to go start the rally. And I had received the email just as we were landing.
You mentioned an email. Is that how Mr. Rothfeld contacted you?
Yes.
What did you learn from that email about the story he was reporting about?
I think it outlined that there was a woman named Karen McDougal who had a story, that was purchased by the National Enquirer but was never published. And, he was asking if we, the Trump campaign, or Mr. Trump knew anything about that.
Can we show for the witness, counsel, and the court only the document that's been marked People's 316, please? Take a look at that document and let me know if you recognize it.
I do.
What is this document?
The original email to me. My response asking the reporter to hold, saying that, I just got his email.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Before you tell me the substance, can you just describe what this is, that the display on the screen is, without reading any content, please?
Oh, it's just an inquiry, a press inquiry.
Is this the email from Mr. Rothfeld to you?
Yes.
That you received on November 4th?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of the email messages that you sent and received?
Yes.
I offer People's 316 into evidence.
No objection.
316 is accepted into evidence.
Please go ahead and display 316 publicly. Now, Ms. Hicks, you can describe the email. Is this the email you mentioned receiving on November 4th?
Yes.
Let's blow up the middle of the page, starting with the line where Mr. Rothfeld's name appears. If you need a minute, go ahead and read that.
Do you want me to read it out loud?
No, just read it to yourself, please. Can we highlight the first paragraph? Is this withdrawn? You testified that the first time you heard the name Karen McDougal was when a reporter from the Wall Street Journal mentioned it. Is that right?
That's right.
Is this the message that you're referring to?
Yes.
And that's the reference to Karen McDougal? That's the first time that you heard her name?
Yes.
Who was with you when you received the email?
Again, a small number of people in the plane, and most of them deplaned very quickly to get to the rally. So I was sort of dealing with this by myself on the plane while the rally was taking place.
Okay. Did you tell Mr. Trump about this inquiry from the Wall Street Journal before he began speaking at the rally?
I believe I did, yes. Just because I was worried about not having enough time to respond while he was speaking. So I did let him know that we had received an inquiry. And that I was going to try to chase down some answers.
After that, what did you do to chase down some answers?
I believe I forwarded the email to Jared Kushner. I wanted to loop him in because he was sort of overseeing a lot of the campaign operations at this point. And 2, he had a very good relationship with Rupert Murdoch, and I was hoping to see if we could buy a little extra time to deal with this.
Let's go ahead and take down People's 316. Can you display People's 317 just to the witness, counsel, and the court? Take a look at the top part of that email. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's my forwarding the reporter inquiry to Jared, like I just said.
Is this an exact copy of the email message that you sent?
Yes.
I offer People's 317 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Please display that exhibit publicly. So, let me direct your attention first to the first message in the chain. Is this the same incoming message from the Wall Street Journal reporter that we saw in the last exhibit?
It looks the same, yes.
Now, directing your attention to the top of the chain, if we can blow that up. Does this show that you forwarded the email to Mr. Kushner?
Yes.
And that's the forward that you just described?
Yes.
Did you also call Mr. Kushner after sending the email?
I did.
What did you discuss?
Just what I had already described. Let him know about it and asked if he thought that, it was a worthwhile endeavor to reach out to Rupert Murdoch, who's the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, to see if we could buy a little extra time.
What, if anything, did Mr. Kushner say to you in response?
I think he said that he wasn't going to be able to reach Rupert, and that we should just work out responding and dealing with it.
We can go ahead and take that exhibit down. You mentioned you did some other follow-up with regard to this inquiry from Mr. Rothfeld, right?
Yes.
What else did you do?
I believe I called Michael Cohen, because I know he had a relationship with Mr. Pecker, and I wanted to see if he knew anything about this.
Did you call anybody else?
I believe I called Mr. Pecker's office as well, to let them know that we had gotten this inquiry, and we obviously didn't know anything about it, and tried to get an understanding of what was going on.
So let's take those in turn. When you called Mr. Pecker's office, did you ultimately reach him?
I believe so.
And what did you speak with him about?
Just asked what was going on. Why was I receiving this email? And he explained that, Karen McDougal was paid for magazine covers and fitness columns, and that it was all very legitimate, that's what the contract was for.
That's what Mr. Pecker explained to you on November 4th when you called him?
That's right.
Had you had discussions with Mr. Pecker before that date having anything to do with Karen McDougal?
Never.
You also mentioned you reached out to Michael Cohen, is that right?
Yes.
Did you end up speaking with him?
Yes. I believe I spoke with Michael before I spoke to Mr. Pecker.
And what did Mr. Cohen say?
I don't really remember. But there was a reason I called David next. I think Michael sort of feigned like he didn't know what I was talking about and that we should connect with David to get more information.
Did you begin drafting a response from the campaign to respond to the Wall Street Journal reporter?
I did.
Did you share that draft response with anyone before sending it to the Wall Street Journal?
I sent it to Michael first, just to get his input, while Mr. Trump was still on stage. And then, when Mr. Trump came on the plane from the rally, I shared it with him as well.
And when you say you shared it with him as well, you're referring to sharing it with Mr. Trump as well?
Yes.
After you sent it to Mr. Cohen, is that right?
Yes.
Let's display just for the witness, counsel, and the court, a document marked for identification as People's 318. Once you review that, let me know if you recognize that document.
Yes, I recognize it.
I'm sorry, you said you recognize the document?
I do.
What is it?
It's a draft statement sent to Michael, and Michael's response back with his edited version.
Is this an exact copy of the email message you sent and received?
Yes.
People's 318 into evidence.
No objection.
318 accepted into evidence.
Let's display that for everybody. And let's zoom in on the initial message at the bottom of the page. Can you tell the jury what this message shows?
These are draft responses that I shared with Michael.
And you sent this from your campaign email account to Mr. Cohen at the Trump Organization. Is that right?
Yes.
And now let me direct your attention to the top of the page. Let's zoom in on Mr. Cohen's reply. Can you go ahead and read what Mr. Cohen said in response?
He suggested that, say these accusations are completely untrue and just the latest despicable attempt by the liberal media and the Clinton machine to distract the public from the FBI's ongoing criminal investigation into Secretary Clinton and her closest associates.
After sending this draft message to Mr. Cohen and getting his response, did you speak to him further about it?
I don't remember, but I'm sure that we did speak.
You mentioned after the rally you also spoke to Mr. Trump about the potential statement. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation.
He wanted to have an understanding of what was going on as well. I believe we called Mr. Pecker's office back. I was relaying what Mr. Pecker had said to me about this being, a legitimate contract for a woman that was going to provide them content, magazine content, and he wanted to hear that from David as well. And so, I believe I have a recollection of us calling David repeating that to Mr. Trump. And sometime after that conversation, Mr. Trump he didn't want to use the statements that we had drafted. He wanted to draft his own statement.
And so, in that conversation you just testified about, he wanted to hear what Mr. Pecker's statement to the Wall Street Journal would be?
He wanted to have an understanding of what David had told me previously.
Did that include what Mr. Pecker told you about what the explanation would be?
It included his explanation for that this was a legitimate contract, and that's what they planned to tell the Journal.
You said Mr. Trump then had input into the statement, is that right?
Yes.
Did he ask you to include anything in the comment to the reporter?
I think we changed the statement not to include almost any of what you just saw, and it was just a denial of the accusations and a statement that they were totally untrue and that we didn't know anything about this deal.
Going back to the email you received from the Wall Street Journal reporter, did it mention any other women in addition to Karen McDougal?
The story was also going to mention Stephanie Clifford, Stormy Daniels, one and the same.
So you understand Stephanie Clifford and Stormy Daniels to be the same person?
Yes.
How did you come to learn that this story would also mention Stormy Daniels?
The reporter told me on the phone.
Did you then, after learning that Stormy Daniels would be in the story, did you have any discussions with Mr. Cohen about Stormy Daniels?
I believe I did. I'm very fuzzy about this point, but I believe I spoke to him.
Did you mention to Mr. Trump that Stormy Daniels would be mentioned in the story?
Yes.
What, if anything, did he say when you told him that Stormy Daniels would be mentioned in the Wall Street Journal story?
He wanted to know the context, and he wanted to make sure that there was a denial of any kind of relationship.
And did you believe that denying the existence of a relationship was responsive to the reporting?
I felt the point of the story was that the National Enquirer paid a woman for her story and never published it. It wasn't necessarily about accusations of, certain behavior.
Is this a good time to break?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let us take our lunch recess at this time. Jurors, I remind you, please, not to talk among yourselves or anyone else about anything related to the case. Please continue to keep an open mind as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. Please do not form or express an opinion as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. And please remember all of the admonitions that I've given to you. Enjoy your lunch.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused.
You may be seated. Thank you, Ms. Hicks. You may step down.
Whereupon the witness is excused.
Is there anything you would like to go over?
No, Judge, thank you.
Nothing for the people.
Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Whereupon a luncheon recess is taken. Whereupon the case is recalled in the afternoon session. Continuing case on trial, People v. Donald J. Trump. All parties are present.
Good afternoon. Should we bring the witness out?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's bring the witness, please.
Witness entering.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hicks. Remember that you're still under oath. Let's get the jury, please.
All rise, jury entering. Whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are present and properly seated. Continuing case on trial, People v. Donald J. Trump. All parties and all jurors are present.
Mr. Colangelo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Hicks. Before lunch, we were talking about an inquiry you got from Michael Rothfeld at the Wall Street Journal. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
And I believe we were discussing a request from Mr. Trump that you included the denial of any relationship with Stormy Daniels in your response to the Wall Street Journal. Do you remember that?
With both of the women who were mentioned in the story, yes.
Thank you. Did you get back in touch with the reporter, Mr. Rothfeld, at that point, to convey the denial of any relationship with Stormy Daniels?
I did.
Around this time on November 4th, did you witness any phone conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen?
I believe I heard Mr. Trump speaking with Mr. Cohen shortly after the story was published.
Did you?
In addition to the phone calls that I described earlier.
Okay, thank you. And when you observed Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen speaking after the story was published, did you participate in that conversation?
No, we were in our car on our way to a rally venue.
Tell the jury a little bit more about how that came to be.
We had landed. After Ohio, we flew to, I think, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so we were getting in cars at the airport to travel to the next event venue. And I don't know who initiated the phone call. I just remember Mr. Trump was speaking to Michael during that car ride, and Reince Priebus was also in the car.
And did you hear either side of that conversation?
I presumably heard Mr. Trump. There was nothing memorable. I don't remember anything that was said, so...
And you said this was on after the plane had landed in Pennsylvania, after leaving the Ohio event where you had been earlier that day?
Yes.
Do you remember where you started the day that morning on November 4th?
I want to say Maine.
So was Ohio your first stop of the day or one of several stops?
No, one of several stops.
And earlier, when you talked about a typical day for you, you mentioned that some days had multiple stops, some days had fewer. Is that right?
Yes.
Did your mornings depend on how many stops you had that day and where you needed to get to?
Yeah. So if we had more stops, we typically left earlier in the day to account for additional travel and, maybe another rally, maybe another campaign stop of some kind. If we had to do like 2 or 3, which was pretty much the average, we might start a little later. So get to the office around 7, but not leave for the airport until a little later that morning.
Okay. So there were days you left early in the morning and days you wouldn't leave until mid-morning or later in the day?
Mid-morning, I would say, yeah.
That was throughout the fall of 2016?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize. Every day was different, but basically, yes.
Now going back to your interactions with Mr. Rothfeld, did the Wall Street Journal later publish the story they contacted you about?
Yes.
Let's bring up People's 180 in evidence. We can display that for everyone. Do you have that on your screen?
Yes.
Is this the article that Michael Rothfeld contacted you about?
Yes.
So this is the article reporting that AMI and David Pecker purchased the rights to a story from Karen McDougal, but never published it.
Yes.
Did you read the Wall Street Journal story when it was first published?
Yes.
Around what time was the article published online?
Sometime in the evening. 6, 7, I can't say when.
Let me direct your attention to the middle of page 2 of this article. I would like to highlight a response starting with Hope Hicks, a campaign spokeswoman. Do you see that?
I see it.
Can you go ahead and read that highlighted passage into evidence, please, into the record?
Sure. It says, Hope Hicks, a Trump campaign spokeswoman, said of the agreement with Ms. McDougal, quote, "We have no knowledge of any of this. She said that Ms. McDougal's claim of an affair with Mr. Trump was totally untrue."
And that statement that you just read, does that accurately reflect the statement that you gave to the Wall Street Journal?
Yes.
Did Mr. Trump tell you to say, "We have no knowledge of any of this"?
I don't remember him, verbatim saying that, but that was the consensus of the conversations that we were all having, that the campaign wasn't aware of this agreement that AMI had with Ms. McDougal. But my recollection is that this is what was told to me, and that's why it was provided as a statement.
Is it your recollection that this was told to you by Mr. Trump?
Certainly that any claims of an affair were totally untrue. Yes, that's what was told to me. I don't have a strong memory of him saying verbatim, "We have no knowledge of any of this." So I just don't want to say that. I don't want to say that that's what he said, because I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember giving grand jury testimony as part of the district attorney's investigation in this proceeding?
Yes.
Would reviewing your grand jury testimony refresh your recollection as to what Mr. Trump told you to say in parts of that response?
Perhaps.
Can we show what's marked for identification, People's 509H, and display that just to the witness, the court, and counsel? Page 685 from that part. Take a look at that, Ms. Hicks, and let me know when you've had a chance to review it.
Yes, I see it.
And does that refresh your recollection as to the source of the information that you gave to the Wall Street Journal?
No. Like I said, the denial was from Mr. Trump for both women. And that's very clear. The part that I'm unsure about is that he said, "We have no knowledge of any of this," directly. So I want, and this doesn't clarify that for me.
Give me 1 second. Take a look at the last 3 lines of this page.
Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
And let me know when you finish reading it.
I see what I said. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just telling you, as I sit here now, I don't have a strong memory of him saying to me, "Say we have no knowledge of any of this." I know very clearly that he stated the denials and wanted to be certain words were included. These are hectic conversations. There's a lot of people weighing in. I just want to say something definitively that I can't remember as I sit here right now. Sorry.
We can take that down. Let's go back to People's 180, please. Can you display the middle of page 4? Let's blow up the passage. This can go to everybody. Do you see the passage that's being displayed?
Yes.
Does that read, Mr. Davidson also represented Stephanie Clifford, a former adult film star whose professional name is Stormy Daniels, and who was in discussions with ABC's Good Morning America in recent months, publicly disclosed what she said was a past relationship with Mr. Trump, according to people familiar with the talks. Ms. Clifford cut off contact with the network without telling her story. She didn't respond to requests for comment. An ABC spokesperson declined to comment on Ms. McDougal or Ms. Clifford. The Trump spokeswoman, Ms. Hicks, said it was absolutely, unequivocally untrue about that Stormy Daniels had a relationship with Mr. Trump. Do you see that statement?
Yes.
Does it accurately reflect what you said to the Wall Street Journal?
Yes. And it also accurately reflects what I said in the grand jury, that what I told to the Wall Street Journal was told to me.
Did Mr. Trump tell you to say to the Wall Street Journal that the relationship with Stormy Daniels was absolutely, unequivocally untrue?
Yes, yes.
Did you, after the story was published, were you in contact with Mr. Cohen about the story?
Yes.
And did you text each other about the story?
Yes.
Let's display People's 259, which is in evidence. We can show everybody. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a catalog of text messages between myself and Michael Cohen during this time period.
Can you identify the dates that these text messages include?
November 4th and 5th of 2016.
Let me direct your attention to the first 3 text messages on the cell. What do these messages show?
I'm sorry. These are from Michael to me?
Correct, yes.
Well, sorry. I'm just making sure that's what it is.
Are they from Michael to you?
Yes.
And what do these messages show?
Michael asking me to call him. Michael asking for updates throughout the evening of the 4th.
Is that sometime between 7 o'clock and 9 p.m.?
Yes.
What did you understand him to be asking about in these texts?
We had landed. After Ohio, we flew to, I think, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so we were getting in cars at the airport to travel to the next event venue. And I don't know who initiated the phone call. I just remember Mr. Trump was speaking to Michael during that car ride, and Reince Priebus was also in the car.
Let me address your attention to the next several texts on this page. Let's see if we can blow up the next 6. What does the first text in this chain show?
It shows me sending the story to Michael, which was at 9:55 p.m.
As you sit here today, do you have a memory as to how close in time the story was published online? You sent a link to Mr. Cohen?
I don't, I'm sorry.
What was Mr. Cohen's response when you sent it to him?
He said, lots of innuendos with little fact.
Can you read the next message as well?
Poorly written and I don't see it getting much play.
Did you understand him to mean, I don't see it getting much play?
I did. Just a little irony there.
How did you respond?
I said, I agree with most of that, but that it will get play because the media is the worst, but he should just ignore and blow past it. And by he, I meant Mr. Trump.
And did the text exchange regarding the Wall Street Journal article continue the next morning?
Yes, it did.
Let's go ahead and display the last 2 messages. Can you describe for the jury what these messages show?
Michael saying that he's only seen 6 additional stories about the Wall Street Journal piece, and that it was getting little to no traction, and that he concurred.
How did you respond?
Yes, I responded.
I'm sorry, can you let me know how you responded?
Oh, I wrote, same, that I was seeing the same.
Let's take a look at the next page and show the top 3 messages. Can you describe to the jury what this shows?
That is a text message from me to Michael, asking him to keep praying because this was obviously the reason why there were only 6 stories. And he wrote back saying that, even CNN wasn't talking about it. No one believes it. And if necessary, I have a statement by Storm denying everything and contradicting the other porn star's statement. I wouldn't use it now or even discuss with him as no one is talking about this or cares. And I responded, agree.
Can you describe what you understood getting little to no traction to mean?
It wasn't being picked up in the same way as something like the Access Hollywood tape was. It wasn't wall-to-wall coverage.
And in the message on the middle of your screen right now, there's a note from Mr. Cohen stating he has a message from Storm.
I see it.
What do you understand that to mean?
I don't know.
Do you have any understanding at all?
I mean, I can guess. But when I say I don't know, I don't believe at the time I received that message that I had the necessary context to totally understand what he was talking about. But it wasn't, I just wanted to move to the next thing. It wasn't obviously I didn't follow up and say, wait, what are you talking about? What statement? I didn't know what he was talking about and I didn't want to know. So I understand what I believe he's implying, which is that I had a statement from Stormy Daniels saying there was no affair, therefore no story to shop.
And when you say you didn't know and you didn't want to know, what do you mean by that?
The election was taking place in 3 days, and we were doing 5 or 6 rallies a day. There was a lot going on. And, it wasn't like this story was consuming the news cycle and that I needed to be, aware of every little detail. I just kind of was hoping at this point we were just going to blow past it and keep going.
Let's take that down and show the rest of the messages on this page. Ms. Hicks, were you in touch with Mr. Cohen again later that day on November 5th?
Yes.
Can you describe the text exchange that follows?
I've texted Michael, and I asked him for David Pecker's cell phone number, and I said, I have it, but Mr. Trump thinks it's the wrong number. He sent me David's phone number, and I said, that's the same one that I have. Thanks. And Michael reiterated, he sent a different phone number and said, he called me from this phone number this morning. I believe meaning Mr. Pecker. And I replied at some point and said that they had already spoken and it was all good.
Why did you ask Mr. Cohen for David Pecker's phone number?
Mr. Trump wanted to speak to him.
When you say they spoke, all good, what does that refer to?
They spoke. The all good means, I don't need your help anymore. They spoke. It's all good.
Meaning Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
Were you present for the phone call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker on the 5th?
I wasn't, no.
What was the response overall to the Wall Street Journal article?
It was sort of muted. All relative compared to some of the other stories we dabbled during the campaign, but it didn't get a lot of traction.
After it was published and on November 5th, did you discuss the article with Mr. Trump?
I did.
What, if anything, did you discuss?
He was concerned about the story. He was concerned how it would be viewed by his wife. And he wanted me to make sure that the newspapers weren't delivered to their residence that morning.
Did he also ask you whether you thought it was likely to affect the campaign?
Everything we talked about in the context of, this time period was about whether or not there was an impact on the campaign. So, certainly I don't recall specifically him saying that. But everything was something that Mr. Trump said a lot is, how is it playing? He wanted to know how things were playing, whether they were playing well or playing poorly. And that could have been a speech, an article, a tweet. So I don't want to speculate, but I'm almost certain he would have asked me, how's it playing? And wanted to know how I felt the next few days were going to go, and if this was going to be a big piece of the next few days.
After the election in November, and before the inauguration in January 2017, did you have a role on the presidential transition?
I did.
What was that role?
I don't actually know. I think it was just an extension of what I was doing on the campaign.
And did you later join the Trump administration as a White House employee?
I did.
When did you start working in the White House?
January 20th, 2017.
How long did you work in the White House?
I worked there until, April 1st of 2018. I left, and then I came back in March of 2020, and left in January of 2021.
In between April of 2018, when you left the White House the first time, and March of 2020, when you returned, where did you work?
I worked at the Fox Corporation.
What was your role at the Fox Corporation at that time period?
I was the Executive Vice President of Communications.
So, going back to your first period of White House employment, what was your position when you joined in January 2017?
When I first joined, I was the Director of Strategic Communications.
What were your responsibilities as the Director of Strategic Communications?
Similar to the campaign. I worked closely with the communications team and the press team on message development and organizing events to help showcase Mr. Trump's accomplishments, the agenda of the administration. I worked closely with Mr. Trump on media opportunities for him. Yeah.
And in that role, did you speak regularly with Mr. Trump?
I did.
You mentioned that was your first role in the White House. Did you later get another position in the White House in that first period of employment?
Yes. Eventually, I became the communications director.
When did your job change from Director of Strategic Communications to Communications Director?
I think in August of 2017.
When you first started working in the White House in that January, where was your desk located?
In the outer Oval Office, right outside the Oval.
Can you describe for the jury what the outer Oval Office is?
Sure. It's like a reception area. There's 2 desks for 2 assistants. And then there's like a small vestibule that was a coat closet and had like a mini fridge and a coffee station in it. And yeah, that's the outer Oval. It's a very small space. Very small.
And you mentioned there was another desk there. Who sat at the second desk when you first started working at the White House?
Madeleine Westerhout.
Who's Madeleine Westerhout?
Madeleine was Mr. Trump's executive assistant once we got to the White House.
What were Madeleine Westerhout's responsibilities when you started working there?
She just looked after Mr. Trump's needs. Worked with various team members on his schedule. Kept his call logs. Took his messages. Worked with him in correspondence. She is, a very good executive assistant.
I think I asked you what your responsibilities were as Director of Strategic Communications. Can you describe what your job responsibilities were when you became the Communications Director?
Sure. So it changed just a little bit to, instead of working with the team, sort of overseeing the team, and just coordinating all of the communication efforts for the administration from the White House throughout all of the agencies, and making sure that each of principals of the agencies and the agencies themselves were prioritizing Mr. Trump's agenda, and that we were all working together to maximize the impact of any positive messages that we were trying to get out and share with the American people, and, capitalize on any opportunities to showcase Mr. Trump and his work, the president in a good light.
In that role as Communications Director, did you continue to speak regularly with Mr. Trump?
I did.
How often did you speak?
Every day.
Now, did there come a time during your White House employment that the Karen McDougal story resurfaced?
In January of 2018, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal. Not so much about Karen McDougal, but it was about Stormy Daniels.
I'll ask you about that story in a second. Let me ask you first. Are you aware that at some point while you were in the White House, that Karen sued AMI to be released from her non-disclosure agreement?
Objection.
Overruled.
I recently had my memory refreshed about that.
So are you aware that that happened?
Yes.
Do you know the date of that lawsuit?
I want to say March 20th.
Of what year?
2018.
I'm going to show just you, I'll show the court and counsel, a document that's been marked People's 319. People's 319. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a text message with myself and Madeleine Westerhout.
Did your attorney produce this text exchange to the district attorney's office in response to a subpoena?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of text messages that you sent and received?
Yes.
I offer People's 319 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's display 319 to everyone, please. Let's zoom in on the top of the screenshot. Can you let the jury know what that says?
It says Madeleine.
And what initials does it show?
MW.
I think you testified that these are texts with Madeleine Westerhout. Yes?
Yes.
Let's scroll down to the bottom of the text message, please. Just the last message showing the date. What is the date of this text message?
Tuesday, March 20th, 2018.
And is this a message from Ms. Westerhout to you?
Yes.
What does that message say?
It says, "Hey, the president wants to know if you called David Pecker again."
I think you testified that March 20th was the same day that Karen McDougal sued American media regarding her NDA agreement.
Yes.
Did you speak to Mr. Pecker that day?
I have no recollection of speaking to David.
You have no memory of that one way or the other?
I don't believe I called him, but I don't know. I don't have a memory of it.
So are you saying it didn't happen, or you just don't know one way or the other?
Objection.
Overruled.
I don't know one way.
And shortly after filing that lawsuit, did Ms. McDougal give an interview to Anderson Cooper on CNN?
Yes.
Do you remember when she gave that interview?
March 24th.
So it was?
March 22nd.
Sometime not long after the exchange we just described?
Yes.
Within a couple of days?
Seems like it, yeah.
Were you aware of that interview when it happened?
Yes.
Did you watch the interview?
Yes.
After Ms. McDougal went on Anderson Cooper, did you have any discussions with Mr. Trump and David Pecker about that interview or about the AMI deal?
I have no recollection of speaking to Mr. Pecker after that interview.
Okay. I'll ask the same question I asked before. Are you saying you don't know one way or the other whether it happened?
I don't believe that happened.
So, your testimony is you didn't speak to them after the interview?
To my knowledge, I did not speak to Mr. Pecker. To be clear, I did speak to Mr. Trump. I was the communications director. This was a major interview. Yes, we just spoke about the news coverage of the interview, how it was playing out. But I don't recall him mentioning Mr. Pecker in those conversations or having a conversation with Mr. Pecker.
And when did you testified that you left the White House after an initial period of, when was that relative to the events I just described?
5 days later.
Did there come a time during your White House employment that the Stormy Daniels story surfaced?
Yes.
When was that?
January 12th, 2018.
Describe how you learned that the story was coming back.
I can't remember exactly, but, someone, either myself or another press communications team member, got an inquiry from the same reporter, Michael Rothfeld, of the Wall Street Journal, describing a story they planned to publish that, Stormy Daniels, who was a footnote in the November 4th story from the previous year, had in fact received a payment of $130,000.
So you first heard about it before the story was posted, and later the article was published, right?
Yes.
When you first heard about it, did you speak to Michael Cohen about the girls from the Wall Street Journal?
I can't remember.
You have no recollection of it, especially with Mr. Cohen at all?
Sitting here right now, no. But if you have anything to refresh my memory...
Let's show the document just to counsel, the court, and the witness that I previously marked for identification as 509H. Let's go to page 703. Go ahead and review that and let me know when you're finished.
So this helped. Thank you. Do.
Please go ahead and let me know.
Sorry. When you were asking the question, I was thinking sequentially, like right when the story came out. I believe I think the 12th was a Friday night. I'm not positive. Maybe Thursday or Friday night. And I don't remember speaking to Michael right then. But at some point in the aftermath of that story, I spoke to him about it. And I do remember that.
What do you remember about that conversation?
I remember Michael just, saying that this wasn't true, that no payment had been made, and that he had a statement from Stormy Daniels, either personally or her attorney, stating that no relationship had transpired.
And
that he had documentation to prove that no payment had been made.
I think you testified a minute ago that you also discussed this story with Mr. Trump. Is that right?
Yes.
And what did you discuss with Mr. Trump?
Just how to respond to the story, how he would like a team to respond to the story.
Did you relay to him the substance of the conversation you had with Mr. Cohen?
I don't recall the sequencing, and I believe I spoke to Mr. Cohen after I spoke to Mr. Trump.
Let's bring up People's 181 in evidence. This can be displayed to everybody. Is this the article we were just discussing?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the second page of the article. Let's look at the third paragraph, please.
I see it.
Can you go ahead and read that third paragraph, please?
It says, "These are old recycled reports, which were published and strongly denied prior to the election," a White House official said, responding to the allegation of a sexual encounter involving Mr. Trump and Ms. Clifford. The official declined to respond to questions about an agreement with Ms. Clifford. It isn't known whether Mr. Trump was aware of any agreement or payment involving her.
Are you the White House official quoted in the story?
No, I'm not.
Who was the White House official quoted in the story?
I can't say for sure. But I think that it was, Hogan Gidley. He was the deputy press secretary.
And as the communications director at the time, withdrawn, did you discuss this statement with Mr. Trump before it was issued?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did Mr. Trump communicate directly with Mr. Cohen about these reports that Stormy Daniels was paid $130,000 a month before the election to stay silent about her allegations?
I only know of one instance where they communicated directly with one another, but I can't say about other than that.
And for the one instance that you know of, when did that conversation take place?
Sometime in the middle of February.
How did you learn about it?
Mr. Trump told me about it.
And can you describe the conversation that you had with him about the conversation he had with Mr. Cohen?
I believe it was the day after, the morning after Michael had given a statement to the New York Times, saying that he had, in fact, made this payment, without Mr. Trump's knowledge. And, so Mr. Trump was saying that he had spoken to Michael. Sorry. This President Trump was saying he spoke to Michael, and that Michael had paid this woman to protect him from a false allegation, and that, Michael felt like it was his job to protect him, and that's what he was doing. And he did it out of the kindness of his own heart. He never told anybody about it, And he was continuing to try to protect him up until the point where he felt he had to state what was true.
And this is what President Trump told you Michael Cohen said to him?
That's right.
How long had you known Michael Cohen by that point?
3.5 years.
And did the idea that Mr. Cohen would have made a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels out of the kindness of his heart, was that consistent with your interactions with him up to that point?
Objection.
Overruled.
I would say that would be out of character for Michael.
Why would it be out of character for Michael?
Objection.
Overruled.
I didn't know Michael to be an especially charitable person, or selfless person. He's the kind of person who seeks credit.
Did Mr. Trump say anything else about this issue when he told you that Michael made the payment?
Just that he thought it was a generous, thing to do, and he was appreciative of the loyalty. That's all I remember.
Did he say anything about the timing of the news reporting regarding...
Oh, yes. He wanted to know how it was playing, and just my thoughts and opinion about this story versus having the story, a different kind of story before the campaign had Michael not made that payment. And I think Mr. Trump's opinion was it was better to be dealing with it now, and that it would have been bad to have that story come out before the election.
Thank you. No further questions.
Your witness.
Thank you. May I inquire?
You may.
Ms. Hicks, I want to start by talking a little bit about your time at the Trump Organization, if that's okay.
Yes.
I think you said you started around October of 2014?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
And your initial title was Director of Communications?
Yes.
And that was a position that the Trump Organization created to bring you in, right?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that you focused on real estate, hospitality, and entertainment. That was your portfolio there?
Yes. Crying. Sorry. Crying. Could I just have a minute?
Of course.
Sorry.
Judge, maybe we could take a break?
Ms. Hicks, do you need a break?
Yes, please. Crying.
Jurors, let's take a few minutes.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused.
You can step down.
Whereupon the witness is excused. Whereupon a recess is taken. Remain seated.
Let's get Ms. Hicks back, please.
Witness entering. Witness entering courtroom. Jury entering courtroom.
Please be seated.
Jury is properly seated. Do all parties confirm?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Bove.
Thank you, Judge. If you need a minute, just let me know. We were talking about the Trump Organization, and I think you said this morning that it ran a little bit like a family business while you were there?
Yes.
You met the family, correct?
Yes.
President Trump's children, right?
Yes.
His wife.
Yes.
And you were interacting with President Trump regularly early on in your time at the Trump Organization, correct?
Yes.
And you felt that you had his trust and respect?
His trust and respect, yes.
You met some of his staff, his other staff, right?
Yes.
Including Rona Graff, you mentioned?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that your perception of that relationship was one of mutual respect between President Trump and Ms. Graff?
Absolutely.
She had a pretty big job there too, right?
Yes. I really looked up to Rona.
And I think you said this morning she was crucial?
She was, yes.
And so she had people helping her, staff of her own, and right?
She did, yeah.
And that included Meredith McIlver?
Yes.
Ms. McIlver was one of President Trump's ghostwriters?
That's true.
Did the Trump Organization have a legal department?
Yes.
And Al Garton was there when you were there?
Yes.
You had plenty of interactions with him?
Yes.
And Jason Greenblatt?
Yes.
You mentioned interacting with Mr. Cohen pre-campaign of the Trump org this morning?
Yes.
And tell me if I am wrong, it sounded like those interactions were pretty minimal?
Yes.
I think you mentioned a little bit of assistance with the licensing aspects of the hotel deal?
I think that was my only experience working with him unrelated to his interest in the political operation.
And so, let's talk a little bit about the campaign. Okay, your title was press secretary, right?
Yes.
And it sounded like your duties and responsibilities morphed onto the new job in a way that sort of carried on what you were doing for President Trump at Trump.org. A little bit, just in a different context, not only real estate and hotels, similar tactics, more politics, less hotels,
Yes.
but still interacting with the press,
Yes.
helping to put together statements, correct?
Yes.
And let's focus on the period 2015 to 2016 for a little bit. Mr. Cohen wasn't a part of the campaign, right?
No. He would try to insert himself at certain moments, but he wasn't supposed to be on the campaign in any official capacity. There were some things he did in a voluntary capacity because of his interest. He would sometimes appear on TV. I think he put together a coalition, a diversity coalition at one point. No, he wasn't looped in on the day-to-day of the campaign strategy. Staff, the plans, no.
The campaign had separate counsel, separate lawyers,
Yes.
and that included Don McGahn?
Yes.
And you mentioned that Had Mr. Cohen made some of the statements and did some TV appearances during the campaign, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that he was instructed to focus on President Trump's business credentials, right?
Yes.
And even in connection with that authorization, he was speaking as a campaign surrogate, not a part of the campaign, correct?
That's right. He was speaking as an employee of the Trump Organization that had experience working with Mr. Trump.
Right. In 2015 and 2016, that's where he still worked?
Yes.
And there were times when he did things that, in a sense, that were frustrating to the campaign staff, right?
Yes.
Things that were unauthorized by the campaign, right?
Yes.
He went rouge at times, fair to say?
Yes.
There were times where Mr. Cohen did things that you felt were not helpful to what you were trying to accomplish, right?
Yes. I used to say that he liked to call himself a fixer or Mr. Fix-It. And it was only because he first broke it that he was able to come and fix it.
Right. And he was really just a lawyer, right?
Yes.
A lawyer at Trump.org, right?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions both this morning and this afternoon about David Pecker, right?
Yes.
And you had met David Pecker before joining Trump.org briefly, correct?
Yes.
And so you had a sense of who he was, right?
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned overhearing some telephone calls between President Trump and Mr. Pecker. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And these things happened a long time ago, right?
Yes, a very long time ago.
And you explained as best you could your memory of those calls, right?
Yes.
And what I want to understand is it wasn't uncommon for President Trump to be speaking to journalists during the campaign, right?
No.
And so those two calls didn't stick out to you as being out of the ordinary, correct?
No.
President Trump gives a lot of feedback, right?
He does. He likes to call and praise people for stories even if they're not about him, just if he thought it was a good story. He likes to call and say when he didn't think it was a good story. He does a really nice job of maintaining relationships and, always being willing to engage with the media even if he doesn't always think that the treatment he gets is fair. He still is willing to engage. So yeah, he spoke often with publishers, journalists, editors.
And he spoke to those types of folks about stories that he liked, right?
Yes.
And ones that he didn't like?
Yes.
And in your experience, it's not uncommon for a campaign to try and work with the media to promote their campaign theme?
No, I wouldn't have a job if that wasn't a regular practice.
Right. It's regular practice, and there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No.
And campaigns try to do social media to amplify some of those themes that are in their theme, right?
Yes.
The ones they like, right?
Yes.
And sometimes campaigns amplify narratives that are positive for their candidate, correct?
Yes.
And vice versa, sometimes the campaign amplifies the negative with respect to the opponent?
Yes.
Sometimes the campaign spends dollars to do that from social media?
Right.
These are all normal, commonplace ways that campaigns operate, right?
I've only been on one campaign, but it was a great one, and that is my understanding.
And it's consistent. That experience is consistent with the consulting work you are doing right now, right?
I don't have a ton of political clients, but I understand what you are trying to say. It's just not something I am practicing right now.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Public figures think about the issues in the same way, right?
Yes?
Let's talk a little bit about what life was like day to day on the campaign trail, okay? It sounded like long days, right?
Yes.
I think you said you were traveling almost every day.
Yes?
Did you travel with a laptop?
I did, yes.
And also your cell phone?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that you were sending hundreds, if not thousands, of messages each day in this period, 2015 to 2016, because of how hectic things were?
Yes.
And so we've looked at 10-ish of your emails over a 2-year period working on the campaign, right?
Yes.
There were many other issues that came up, correct?
Yes.
And it was common in this period, especially in 2016, as you got towards the election, for there to be outreach from the press about potentially negative stories relating to your candidate, President Trump, right?
Yes.
And obviously you talked today about a couple of those stories, right?
Yes.
But this was near constant, correct?
Yes.
And the two that we focused on so far are the Access Hollywood tape, right? And then these Wall Street Journal articles about Ms. McDougal and Ms. Clifford, right?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about when that Access Hollywood tape came out. I think you said that you first got wind of it on a sort of Friday night when you were at Trump Tower during the debate prep.
It was Friday afternoon, 1:30.
Thank you. And people were there getting ready for the debate, that right?
Yes.
It was sort of your normal goal to report on developments like that, right?
Yes.
And people were together because of the debate prep
That's right.
And the president was there for the debate prep, right?
Yes?
And so there was an in-person meeting to discuss how to react to this news article, right?
That's right.
That concept of gathering the key campaign staff and the president to talk about an issue that could impact the campaign, that was standard for the way you were all operating at the time, right?
I mean, most often when we were on the road, it was just whoever was with us.
Right?
It was unusual to be at Trump Tower.
And what was unusual about it is that for once out of all that time you were actually in New York, not on the road, people had gathered for the debate prep, right?
Yes.
You recall, don't you, there was some leaks of President Trump's tax information prior to this?
I think just before the first debate.
And in connection with that, the campaign staff gathered to talk about how to respond with the president, right? Either physically or on the phone.
That's my recollection, yes.
And that Friday night into the Saturday morning, people worked pretty late, right?
Yes.
And I think we looked at President Trump's statement that ended up being October 8th. It was after midnight on October 8th.
Yes, that's right.
He stayed there late to put that together, correct?
He did.
You had a sense, didn't you, that this was causing him personal stress, right?
Yes. Yes, he was worried about how this would be viewed at home.
And you said a little bit ago you got a chance to meet President Trump's wife during your work at Trump.org and also on the campaign?
Yes.
What about your observations of that relationship caused you to think that night this was causing him stress about what would happen at home?
President Trump really values Mrs. Trump's opinion, and she doesn't weigh in all the time. But when she does, it's really meaningful to him. And he really, really respects what she has to say. So I think he was just concerned about what her perception of this would be. And yeah, I know that was weighing on him.
Weighing on him that night, right? And it continued to weigh on him as more allegations were made in the media, right?
Yes.
Now, I think you said that he talked to Mr. Cohen the following day?
Yes.
And to be clear, Mr. Cohen wasn't in any of the meetings at Trump Tower, right?
No.
Wasn't even in the United States, correct?
No.
He was in London?
I think so.
And as best you can recall, on a day that happened a long time ago, it seemed like the focus of your conversations that day were on concerns about a different tape, right?
That's right.
And I think we can call it an alleged tape, right?
Yes.
Alleged because you later confirmed that it didn't exist?
That's right.
And that day, you reached out to Mr. Cohen because you knew that he had a relationship with someone who might be able to find out more information about this alleged tape, right?
Yes, that's right.
The relationship that we're talking about is with a member of the media, correct?
Yes.
And it sounded like maybe the Access Hollywood tape came up, but the focus of the conversations with Mr. Cohen that day with you were on this other issue?
Yes. I think it would have been odd to talk and not acknowledge, the news cycle of the past 24 hours. That wasn't the purpose of the call or what we spoke about.
I want to jump ahead a little bit to the November 4th, 2016 Wall Street Journal article. I think you said that was the first time you heard Karen McDougal's name?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that it was the second time you remember hearing Stormy Daniels' name?
That's right.
Because you referenced the conversation that you had overheard on a plane, I think around November 2015?
That's right.
And I just need to clarify that that conversation related to, it involved President Trump, right? He was there on the plane?
He was on the plane, yes.
But still interacting with the press?
Yes, that's right.
You talked about when the article, the November 4th, 2016 article came out, that President Trump asked that the newspapers not be brought to the residence that day?
Yes.
And that was another indication, wasn't it, that this was hitting home in a very real way?
Yes.
That there were parts of this that were very, very personal to him, right?
Absolutely. I don't think he wanted to. I don't think he wanted anyone in his family to be hurt or embarrassed by anything that was happening on the campaign. He wanted them to be proud of him.
The last thing I want to do is talk a little bit about your time in the White House. You described some conversations with President Trump that I think you said happened in 2018, right?
Yes.
And you were there that day. You were working, right?
Yes.
In your official capacity, right?
Yes.
And he was there trying to be president of the United States, right?
Yes.
And that office that you described, the Oval Office and the area around it, that was a very hectic space in 2017, right?
Yes.
And it sounds like for a period of time when you had that job, you could see from where you were sitting the Resolute desk?
Yes.
That's where the president sat?
Yes,
When he was acting as president, right?
that's right.
So you got a sense of how chaotic that environment was day to day, right?
Uh-huh. That particular area wasn't necessarily chaotic in a bad way. I just want to clarify, it was very busy. There was a lot going on. There were certainly parts of the experience that were chaotic, but he was constantly moving.
People were working very hard to make it not chaotic and keep it orderly.
Yes,
But the fact is, there were many meetings and a lot going on, right?
yes,
And from where you sat, you could see that the president was frequently multitasking, right?
yes,
And people were interrupting what he was doing, right?
yes,
Different priorities would get called out to his attention, and he would pivot.
that's right.
And in that time frame, in 2017, while you were focused on your job at the White House, you didn't have anything to do with the business records of the Trump org. 200 plus miles away from New York City, did you?
No,
I have nothing further.
Anything else?
1 minute to confer, Your Honor.
Sure.
Attorneys conferring.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. You can step out.
Witness excused.
Counsel, please approach.
Whereupon an off-the-record discussion was held.
Jurors, we're going to call it a week at this time. Before I excuse you, I would like you to please not talk either among yourselves or with anyone else about anything related to the case. Please keep an open mind. Do not form or express an opinion about the defendant's guilt or innocence until all the evidence is in, and I have given you my final instructions on the law, and I have directed you to begin your deliberations. Do not request, accept, agree to accept, or discuss with any person information concerning this trial, receipt or acceptance of any payment or benefit in return for supplying any information about the trial. Report directly to me any incident within your knowledge involving an attempt by any person to improperly influence you or any member of the jury. Do not visit or view any of the locations discussed in the testimony. Do not use any program or electronic device to search for and view any locations discussed in the testimony. Do not read, view, or listen to any accounts or discussions of the case. That includes the reading or the listening to the reading of any transcripts of the trial or the reading of any postings on the court site. Do not attempt to research any fact, issue, or law related to the case. Do not communicate with anyone about the case by any means, including by telephone, text messages, email, or the Internet. Do not Google or otherwise search for any information about the case or the law which applies to the case or the people involved in the case. Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Jury leaving courtroom.
So we can use this time that we have to finish up the Sandoval. I believe there was one more issue on Sandoval that we needed to resolve. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to. Look, I don't think this is a long argument. We very much object to President Trump being cross-examined on the findings of the court earlier this week for a couple of different reasons. The first one is that, this is a trial where the jury sees you every day. And so interjecting into the cross-examination of President Trump, a finding by Your Honor beyond a reasonable doubt of contempt raises. And there are a lot of reasons that would go into explaining it that obviously President Trump would have to talk about. It puts a layer on top of the testimony that really the risk of prejudice, because it's in this courtroom with Your Honor, is greater than it would otherwise be. And more importantly, or as importantly, for many of the contempt findings, the repost, for example, we're appealing. We accept the order of the court. There is no case law that suggests that was a violation. The court noted that. There is a lot that went into those reposts and a lot of process that went into that. The finding of contempt is what it is. But to be able to cross-examine President Trump on that, if he takes the stand, just invites this whole sideshow that the people don't need. And especially because they're already getting what Your Honor has already ruled, that if President Trump testifies, he can be cross-examined on a prior finding by a different judge in a different court on this issue. So, to the extent that the people want to expose President Trump and cross-examine him on that issue, they're going to do it. For those reasons, we do not think it's appropriate to allow the people to cross-examine President Trump.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the last point that Mr. Blanche just raised, as Your Honor noted in your original Sandoval ruling, the court analysis is not bound by the number of the defendant's prior convictions. That's People v. Gray. And so, in fact, the courts have discretion to permit inquiry into the defendant's entire criminal history. Here, the court's findings of 9 criminal contempts are directly relevant to the defendant's credibility. They're finding that the defendant intentionally violated the court order. Both the Court of Appeals and the First Department have expressly held that contempt findings are appropriate and allowable. Sandoval evidence of the case, I am thinking of People v. Grant, where the Court of Appeals held that a prior criminal contempt conviction bears heavily on the issues of veracity, since a person who willfully violates may logically be presumed to be, similarly, willing to violate his obligation to tell the truth, despite his having made a promise to the court to testify honestly. That is 7 NY 3D 421. And the First Department reached the same conclusion in a different case, People v. Ciochenda, Ciochenda, that is 17 AD 3D 248. Again pointing out that the trial court did not abuse its discretion in allowing inquiry into instances where the defendant violated court orders. So these findings, Your Honor, are directly relevant to the defendant's credibility, should he choose to testify. As the court already noted, the balancing analysis that the court performs is to take into account not only the potential prejudice to the defendant, but also the prejudice to the people of being unable to present important, in some cases, dispositive evidence of the defendant's credibility to the jury.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Blanche. I think for a jury to hear that this court, the same judge that is presiding over this case, has found Mr. Trump to be in contempt on this case, I think would be so prejudicial, it would be very, very difficult for a jury to look past that. So I agree with Mr. Blanche, and I am going to deny the people's application to go into that. Anything else?
One more thing that is outstanding. We had handed up last week a draft instruction on redactions. I don't think it's particularly controversial. We don't want the jury speculating about why some of these exhibits are so heavily redacted. I have another copy, if you, Your Honor, wants it, or you still have it.
I have it.
Give it sooner rather than later. We have been displaying a lot of exhibits that are heavily redacted. We plan to do more of that. And I just think this relatively benign instruction is not going to hurt anyone other than preventing undue speculation on the part of the jury.
No objection.
So, I will take care of that on Monday. In general, where do we stand as far as limiting instructions? I know we have spoken about this a lot. I have given a few. Are there any outstanding limiting instructions? Are there any instructions you would like me to give on Monday? Let me know where we stand.
We will. We will think about that and communicate with the people and let the court know. Nothing comes to mind. But I want to discuss that when we talk about the testimony.
Okay, anything else?
I don't think so.
Whereupon the trial of this matter stands adjourned to Monday, May 6, 2024.